What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the next episode of my off-season deep dive series and the reveal of the number 31 team in my power rankings heading into next season with the New England Patriots. The first time on this channel not getting to talk about Bill Belichick, at least not as the head coach of the existing New England Patriots. A weird transition, something we've gotten so used to here, but honestly not a ton of turnover with this Patriots team, at least on one side of the ball. And there's going to be a big question here about what is this defense going to look like with Jerod Mayo? Can he kind of, keep the legacy going for the Patriots of having a great defensive mind in charge of everything? And then, of course, bringing in Drake May, a lot to talk about with this young offense. While obviously ranking 31, this team is expected to have some learning curves this season. They've got their quarterback that they're planning on building around here, and they're hoping certainly that this is not going to be a 3-year rebuild year. Maybe they can start to see some of these pieces we're going to talk about here today come together as the season goes on, and they could build some hype heading into next year. That's definitely their hopes for this team. So it's going to be a fun episode. Before we get started, if you enjoy the deep dive series, if you enjoy this video, if you could take just a quick second to hit that like button down below. It really is a free and easy little thing that really does support my channel, help get this video out in front of as many eyes as possible. It would mean a lot to me. This is really all I have time for this summer. These videos take 25 to 30 hours to produce, so if you could take just a second to hit that like button, it would really help me out. Thank you. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of the remaining 30 deep dives here as we lead up to the season. And lastly, we do have our first guest for the series here today. My good friend Andre Weingarten is going to join us to talk some Patriots in the last segment of the video. So make sure you stick around for that. It's going to be a great conversation ahead with Andre. But without further ado, let's get into the New England Patriots, starting as always by recapping their offseason, going through each piece of the team, who they lost, who they added. Is it a downgrade? Is it an upgrade? And that starts with the coaching staff. And look, I know we're excited for Jerod Mayo, but come on, how could you go anything other than downgraded until proven otherwise? Bill Belichick basically being asked to leave here as they go to their succession plan in Jerod Mayo. It's not that this staff can't work, but Bill Belichick was still a phenomenal coach in charge of this thing. He took a team that was riddled with injuries and still finished in the top 10 of defensive DVOA. I do have the opinion that Bill Belichick is the greatest defensive mind to ever touch the NFL. So, yeah, big shoes for Jerod Mayo to fill. I don't think it should be controversial to say downgraded there, but it's also not just Belichick. I have my fair share of questions about Alex Van Pelt and the offensive coaching staff as well, taking over for Bill O'Brien. And then they're also going to switch special teams coordinators, going from Cam Acord to Larry Izzo. They're definitely hoping that'll be an upgrade, at least in terms of special teams, because their special teams were surprisingly terrible last year. But yeah, downgraded for the coaching staff. But then you look at the quarterback room. Look, man, watching film, getting ready for this episode, it was tough to watch Mac Jones, just a shell of his old self. And honestly, his failures last year were the prime example of something we're going to talk about in a little bit here and why this team shouldn't rush to start Drake May, because when Mac Jones came into the league, a big strength of his was pocket presence, confidence from the pocket, stepping up in the face of pressure. Not so much last year. He was throwing fadeaways off his back foot, getting into, hero ball, not stepping up in the pocket, you name it. He was really horrible last year to the point that Bailey Zappi was arguably better than him. So even just bringing in Jacoby Brissett would be an upgrade for this roster. But then, of course, you get the very talented Drake May with the number 3 pick in this draft. We'll have plenty to talk about there, but it is expected the quarterback will be upgraded here, whether that's Brissett or May. Even Joe Milton will we'll have some conversation about him later on. But then at running back, They're basically swapping Zeke for Antonio Gibson. I'm going to call that a push. It's nothing substantial there. Ramondre Stevenson is still going to be in-house as RB1. I did like the JaMychal Hasty addition as well. Nice little depth add. But yeah, neutral for running back. Neutral for tight end as well. It's mostly just, flipping around some backups as they did bring back Hunter Henry. Mike Gesicki, flip for Austin Hooper. I'll call that a push. Pharaoh Brown actually went off for this team last year. I don't think they were anticipating that he would do that again. So they let him go and draft Jaheim Bell in the 7th round. Kind of athletic hybrid wing tight end. Nice 7th round pick there, but still neutral there in the tight end room. Then at wide receiver, I am going to give them the benefit of saying slightly upgraded here. Devontae Parker, really their only loss here. He only played about half their snaps last year, but even then, I think Jalen Polk as a 2nd-round pick is Devontae Parker-esque in terms of skill set. You bring in KJ Osborne as well as Javon Baker as a 4th-round pick, so much better depth, and Parker certainly wasn't what they hoped he would be when they traded for him and gave him a decent contract there. So we're going to go slightly upgraded in the wide receiver room, even if they're still missing some juice in that group, as we'll see later. And then on the offensive line, I have to go slightly downgraded just because they are losing Trent Brown. Now, this would be like a big downgrade if not for the fact that Trent Brown only plays about 50 to 60% of his games every year. So you were looking at a lot of starts from guys like Connor McDermott and Vidarian Lowe. And, they bring in Chukwuma Okorafor, who is more durable and has started a lot of games for the Steelers. It's a downgrade from Trent Brown, but I don't think it's like the end of the world. Something they can stomach as they see if a Caden Wallace can be a stud, or if, in a year from now they can find an upgrade there. And then they draft the kind of developmental guard Layden Robinson in the 4th round. So we are going to have some questions on that offensive line being a little bit downgraded. But as we look at the defensive side of the ball, with the exception, of course, of coaching, which is a downgrade and something that they're going to have to prove that Gerard Mayo can, handle the torch being passed from Bill Belichick. But with the exception of that, this roster defensively has done nothing but get better, in my opinion. On the interior defensive line, Lawrence Guy is out the door. I believe he retired. He's been around, been a mainstay for a while, but they bring in Armon Watts, who at this point is pretty much a push there. On the edge, you got to count Matthew Judon as an upgrade. He went down in the first month of the season. He's their best player in that edge room. They're planning on getting him back off the torn bicep injury, so that's a big upgrade in itself. They didn't lose anybody else there. Linebacker is going to stay neutral. I did like what Mack Wilson did for them. I'm excited to talk about him a little bit with the Cardinals, who picked him up, but they do add Sion Takitaki, who definitely fits what they like from these big thumping linebackers. He's been good in that role for Cleveland, so we're going to call that neutral. Their 2 starters are still in place there. And then in the cornerback room, upgraded as well in the sense of returning key players for injury. They had J.C. Jackson, who was brought in off the street as a Band-Aid pickup. Miles Bryant, I think Patriots fans were ready for him to head out here. He had eaten up a lot of snaps, but, they were really counting on Marcus Jones to be that upgrade in the slot last year. He goes down in, I think, the first week of the season, maybe week 2. And then, of course, their 1st-round pick from last year, Christian Gonzalez at cornerback, he looked phenomenal. He goes down in like week 4. So really massive additions in the sense of returning players for injury. For the purposes of how we're looking at this exercise, I think it's totally fair to count those as additions compared to last year's defense. And then they add Marcellus Dial, a bit of a project athlete out of the SEC, in the 6th round of that group. So again, I do see the cornerback room as upgraded and fairly significantly upgraded. In the safety room, they are saying goodbye to Jalen Mills. Very much played at a replacement level for them. And I just can't count that as a downgrade. Even if they're losing him, they have players on the roster that I think can give them what Jalen Mills did. And if they want, they could bring him back. I don't think he's been signed anywhere else. And then on the special teams, I'm going to leave that as upgraded. The legendary Matthew Slater, probably the most notable gunner over the course of the last decade in the NFL. I believe he has retired. And then they are hoping to upgrade at kicker, bringing in Joey Sly. Can't be much worse than what they had last year, but Sly is not anything crazy. So it is upgraded just because how bad Chad Ryland was for them last year as their young kicker. But again, special teams were a big issue for them last year, and we'll see that again later in the video. So I do think it was a good offseason for the Patriots. I'm particularly excited about the kind of defensive roster where they realize that they're kind of close here. They've got a really good core group of players, and some of those injuries kind of derailed them a little bit from what they were hoping to be last year, which, you know, I'm not trying to say this is a negative, but it does kind of make me wonder of, like, could Bill Belichick have turned this into a really special defense just if you gave him one more year here? I'm not saying they made a mistake moving on from Bill Belichick, but I'd be lying if there wasn't like a part of me that would have loved to see just this group one more run at it, at least defensively. But obviously offensively, like, Bill was getting in the way there with him kind of being the tyrant of the organization and how many whiffs he's had offensively, how they set Mac Jones up for failure. Look, I get why they had to kind of take a step back from Bill Belichick on a whole, and then they're hoping Gerard Mayo can kind of keep things going and prove that he himself maybe isn't Bill Belichick, but is a great defensive mind. But as far as transitions into a new era go, I think this was handled pretty well, and I like that they kind of identified the core players of this team and got them back. You know, they didn't spend a ton of money outside of the organization in free agency, but they did retain some guys. You know, free agents like Josh Uche, Hunter Henry, Mike Onwenu, Kyle Duggar. Getting those guys back, I think, was really important because this team hasn't drafted great over the years, but you should retain the guys you have drafted and hit on, and I think they did that. And, you know, overall, their offseason certainly gets my stamp of approval. But let's transition to talk more about this coaching staff and kind of what they're going to look like schematically, how I rank this coaching staff right now heading into basically their rookie season together. So Gerard Mayo taking over, and I've hit on it at this point. Like, he's got some pretty freaking big shoes to fill, maybe the biggest shoes to fill. I'm on the record, and I'm not afraid to say that Bill Belichick is the greatest coach in the history of the NFL, certainly the greatest defensive mind, in my opinion, and there's no reason not to be excited about Gerard Mayo, right? But the dude's got some big freaking shoes to fill, and it's not like Bill Belichick did a bad job coaching last year. This was an injured, beat-up defense that still finished in the top 10 of DVOA come season's end. So that is going to be the biggest question for this defense, at least, is, you know, how much of that defense being as good as it was last year was Bill Belichick, and can Gerard Mayo bring a similar impact to that side of the ball? And can he go from being Belichick's assistant to being the guy in charge of not just the defensive game plans and the play calling and all of that? And I understand he was very involved last year, but it is difficult to separate that from Bill Belichick. But not just the defensive side of the ball, but can he do that also as a rookie head coach at 38 years old, having only been a coach in the league for 5 years? He has had a very fast ascension here, but I also think that's a positive. That's a huge endorsement of how smart he is. He was a very smart player, but maybe an even smarter coach, a great leader that this team obviously believes in, has bought into. So again, there's plenty of reason to be excited about Gerard Mayo and what he could be here. I'm pulling for him and very excited to see what he can do here. But if we're ranking this team and their coaching against the rest of the league, I can't sit here and say they have the elite defensive coaching that they've had in years past, at least not yet. I think we just need to see what Gerard Mayo can do here, and they get a B- ranking from me in terms of the defensive coaching in both phases. And I think that's fair. It's saying it's a very good starting point for a rookie head coach here, and it can really only go up from there, in my opinion. And again, I do love the continuity aspect of all of this, where it's not like you're taking a young coach from another organization and asking him to replicate that somewhere else. You know, it's really all still connected here in terms of the chemistry between Mayo and the players and a lot of his assistants as well. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't spend some time talking about this unique scheme that they're going to have on the defensive side of the ball that they have had for the last 2+ years in their 3-3-5 kind of base defense here. Why it's so unique, how it works, and how it has brought a schematic advantage to the Patriots defense that really no one else in the league has honestly been either able to replicate this or even been paying all that close of attention, because it's not like this team's been winning a ton of games or even been praised for how good they've been defensively. They've kind of quietly been a top 10 to 15 defense with mediocre roster talent since they've really started to run this 3-3-5 base front. And, you know, with the exception of maybe the Raiders with Patrick Graham, who has some Belichick influences, who do some of this 3-3-5 stuff, but certainly not to the extremes that New England does, no one else is really basing their defense in the way that New England is. And I just find it really fascinating. So we're going to get into the weeds a little bit here and what this looks like. So whereas the rest of the league are basically basing their defense out of a 4-2 nickel front in some regard, whether their edge rushes are standing up or putting their hand in the dirt, it's mostly the same stuff around the league. Not so much in New England. New England is running a 3-3-5 odd/hybrid front that is at its core a 5-1 front with 3 down linemen between the tackles and 2 stand-up outside edge, outside linebackers, and then that one big middle linebacker that they have kind of rounding out the front. Now, the idea of running a 5-1 front is nothing special. You'll see that in any NFL game. A team will break out a 5-1, but it's much more of a typical nickel pass rushing front. The edge rushers will be more typical, you know, pass rush oriented style, just typical edge rushers. Whereas New England has molded this into, again, their base defense in a really remarkable way that keeps it super balanced and able to defend all phases of the game, the run game, the drop back pass game, the play action game. So instead of a typical 5-1 front, New England's put their own kind of wrinkles on this that, again, allows them to base out of this defense. So it starts with those edge rushers, which for them go back to their roots with the hybrid outside backer, going back to Rob Ninkovich and Jamie Collins and, you know, Donta Hightower, Kyle Van Noy. And then on this team, it's, you know, Anthony Jennings and the way they used Jelani Tavai last year. Matthew Judon built a little bit more like a typical edge, but pinpointed as a specifically smart edge guy in terms of run defense and coverage drops. So they're going back to that root with an edge rusher that has not just excellent run defense, but also the ability to rush the passer and the ability to drop into coverage here. So by nature, you're bringing in some of that more 3-down flexibility. But on top of that, they're now taking their middle linebacker, because in a 5-1 front, one of the big weaknesses is you only have one linebacker out there. So whereas a lot of teams, their biggest linebacker is 235 pounds, the Patriots say, screw that. We got 250 pounds of meat in guys like Jawan Bentley or Jelani Tavai. They just signed Sion Taki. These actual throwback linebackers where if you're going to base out of this front, you know that one linebacker isolated in the middle is going to get exposed to bigger offensive linemen, more compromising situations. They have to have those traditional stack and shed skills. But what's really the cherry on top of all of this is these hybrid safeties that they have. More specifically, Kyle Duggar, but Jabril Peppers can do some of this, and they now have Marte Mapu getting into the mix this year, where they will walk that second safety down into the box, and all of these guys are actually like adequate linebackers in terms of run defense, which you can't say about a ton of strong safeties. especially in Kyle Duggar's case, he is legitimately a better middle linebacker than a lot of the starters in the NFL. And essentially what that's doing when you walk that guy down into the box is you now have nickel personnel that is actually a 3-4 base front. So you have the legitimate ability to stop the run. This was a defense that was third in defensive DVOA last year against the run, but also the body types and coverage players to defend the passing game out of this formation. And another reason this has worked quite well is I think this was all an evolution of that Rams-Patriots Super Bowl where the Patriots won like 13-10 against that Rams wide zone offense, where Belichick had studied actually what Matt Patricia did in a Lions game against the Rams earlier that year and figured out that if you just put as many bodies at the line of scrimmage, it makes those wide zone blocking schemes quite difficult. Now, that was a 6-1 front, but you get into a 5-1 front with an extra safety in the box to cover a gap. You're getting really close to a front equipped to defend the offensive meta in the NFL, which is outside zone and play action off of wide zone. But you're getting into that without compromising the type of personnel you have on the field. So it's really something fantastic they've built here. Now, there's downsides here too, right? Like, these are specific role fits in all of these positions, specifically with those edge players, the thumping middle linebacker, that safety that's maybe more of a box type. Those are great when called into the right play calls in the right situations and schemed around. But those edge rushers you're putting out there aren't as good of pass rushers. Guys like Jennings and Jelani Tavai, they're not as good of pass rushers as the typical edge rushers you'd put in a 5-1 front. That middle linebacker, that thumping 250-pound guy, you've got to coach around his deficiencies in coverage because he is a throwback linebacker. So when it comes to getting these guys in the right position in coverage and specifically getting a pass rush out of this front, it does come down to calling the right coverage, picking the right tendencies, and a lot of times in terms of the pass rush, getting those stunts going, create unblocked rushers and create phantom pressure and confuse blocking schemes by making them think they got to slide towards Judon, but all of a sudden he's dropping into coverage, and then you've blitzed the middle linebacker unblocked, into the right gap. That's the type of stuff that Belichick has just been such an ace for this team that Mayo's going to have to prove that he can bring that sort of coaching to this team, right? Now, I do want to mention at least a little bit about the sort of coverages that they run out of this defense, and it goes without saying, like, if they get into 3rd and 11, yeah, they'll go out in any variety of dime packages just as anybody else would. So it's not like they're only coming out in this 5-1 front. But, when you're showing this look, it's a single high structure. So naturally, they're going to run a lot of cover 1, a lot of cover 3. But this front is as good at rotating into an inverted cover 2 as anything you could scheme up. And a well-run inverted cover 2 can really mess with the quarterback. If you are expecting single high and all of a sudden the secondary is rotating all over the place and you've got stunts and blitzes and games coming at you up front and you got to process things out quickly, you can really mess with these quarterbacks, especially the young ones. And, they talk about Belichick being so good against rookie quarterbacks. It's this type of stuff that he's been so good at over the years. But the Patriots ran the second most cover 2 in the NFL last year, and that's not a coincidence. When they're coming out in this defense and you have a safety playing middle linebacker, you know what he can do better than any linebacker in the league? Run the pull. Play that hole shot against cover 2. So you can rotate an outside corner or even the slot corner. They love to do that. You can rotate him as one half of the field deep. They'll rotate Peppers or Duggar, whichever safety they have deep that play. They can rotate him to the other half, and then you have a safety patrolling the middle of the field. And really you can have everything covered up quite well from that. So that specific rotation is something you got to look out for from this front. And again, that's why the majority of their coverages are cover 3, cover 1, and cover 2. This is not a huge quarters team because they like to be a single high team. But that's enough nerding out about the Patriots defense. But I do think this is it's an extended conversation with this team because they really do things differently. And I think it's really exciting. And I really hope Gerard Mayo can keep this thing going with this because to me, it's the most fun defense to watch from an X's and O's nerding out standpoint. But we do have to talk about the offense. And of course, DeMarcus Covington, I didn't mention him as the young defensive coordinator getting the promotion here. You know, he's obviously an extension of Gerard Mayo. There's not much to say there, but I'm happy for the guy. Let's, we'll give him a chance and see what he can do. But yeah, honestly, my optimism kind of stalls out with the offensive side of things here. Look, I'm just at this point really against hiring guys that piggybacked off of Aaron Rodgers' success. When has that literally ever worked? Joe Philbin, Bob McAdoo, who's here in New England as an assistant. I think Mike McCarthy's been extremely overrated for a long time. Look at how bad Nathaniel Hackett is. There are so many coaches that had success with Aaron Rodgers that just have gone elsewhere and been mediocre to bad. And with Alex Van Pelt, I don't have any doubt that he's a good quarterbacks coach and that Aaron Rodgers loved having him in the building and that Baker Mayfield, swears by him and, Watson has good things to say about him. It's not like Alex Van Pelt did a good job with Deshaun Watson or any of the quarterbacks in Cleveland, really. And even if, you look at Baker's 2020 season, I mean, you're still under Kevin Stefanski there, who I do have a ton of respect for. I mean, he was in Cincinnati the year before that when they went 2-14, one of the worst years of Andy Dalton's career. I don't mean to obsess about his, resume and his pedigree, but I need to really be convinced that this is a guy who's never called plays before that's going to come into a frankly disastrous situation and be a good, basically offensive head coach. This isn't even like, Philadelphia where you have like a Nick Sirianni and he's going to be the overseer of the offense and let you call plays for you. It's not even like that. It's like, yeah, no, the whole defensive staff is in place, but Alex Van Pelt, you're the guy. You're the guy to basically build this offense from scratch, coach up Drake May, make it happen. I don't mean to be overly pessimistic here. And maybe he can be the first sort of Aaron Rodgers guy that finally proves to be anything worth a damn in the NFL. But look, I'm just skeptical. I am. I'm just going to be honest about it. I really hope I'm wrong. Those that follow my draft takes, I need Drake May to be good. So I freaking pray I'm wrong here. But I'm really, really not convinced that this is the right hire, the right direction to go. And I think they rank as low as the worst in the league in terms of offensive coaching. I would have rather just kept Bill O'Brien around. I would. Former head coach. I think he's proved to be an adequate play caller. I think last year roster-wise was a nightmare. I would have rather just kept him around. I would. And maybe Patriots fans will be mad about that, but we'll see. I'll give him a chance. It's his first crack at things. For what it's worth, I am curious what sort of system he wants to go with, what kind of play calls and tendencies and all that. He kind of has every bag available to him. Comes from a spread style offense under Mike McCarthy all those years. And then he's done more of the Shanahan sort of Kubiak, Stefanski stuff over the last 5 years, going back to, Zach Taylor in that first year coming over from working for Sean McVay. When Van Pelt was there in Cincinnati, it was very much the Shanahan McVay style offense. So that's what he's been learning the last 5 years. So he's He's learned under a couple different systems. He was even coaching, years before he went to Green Bay for Mike McCarthy. He's 54 years old. He's seen a lot of stuff. So schematically, it's very much to be determined. I would expect it to be very Stefanski, Shanahan style with a lot of play action and 12 personnel. And, the Browns started as more of a wide zone team, but have gotten into being much more of a power and counter type of team. I think you can do that with this style of offense with kind of the power guards and the power running backs. So that's kind of what I'm expecting, but to be determined in terms of scheme and what they're going to do there. But again, I'm extremely skeptical of this hire. And it just is what it is. We'll see how it goes for them. But needless to say, I'm pretty optimistic about the defensive side of things. Offensively, I really need to be convinced here. All right, now let's get into the roster breakdown here where we're going to rank each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. And that's going to start with the passing game breakdown, and we have to have a sort of two-sided conversation with this quarterback room here. So I've actually got them ranked 27th in the league for a quarterback. And believe it or not, that actually has nothing really to do with the fact that I was very high on Drake May as a prospect in this draft. I'm obviously extremely excited that they got him, and we're going to talk about him. But I like Jacoby Brissett too, man. I thought this was a good signing when they made it. I think Jacoby has been the best quarterback on his NFL football team the last 2 seasons. Cleveland, 2022, he was very firmly like the 16th best quarterback in the league and much better than Deshaun Watson when he stepped in. Last year, I understand why the Commanders wanted to play Sam Howell. I do. They wanted to see what was behind the magic box. But eventually, when he was so bad that they had to put Jacoby Brissett in, Jacoby looked better. And he's maxed out. He's not a great athlete. He's not the most creative passer. He's kind of a textbook drop back pocket passing quarterback. So, what he is. But I think what he is a top 32 quarterback in the NFL and someone that can come into a very shaky situation and steer the boat. A guy that's played in all sorts of situations, good teams, bad teams. He's an incredible, high character, tough dude. He's big, so he can take hits behind what could be a questionable offensive line. He's also a quarterback that plays on time. He plays in structure. He trusts his receivers, so he's going to give these guys like Jalen Polk opportunities to come in and succeed, guys that don't necessarily create a ton of separation, especially when you look at guys like Polk, Bourne, Juju, KJ Osborne. These aren't burners, but Jacoby is a guy that's going to trust that he'll be in the right spot against zone, give him that tough back shoulder look on a comeback. And I really think he was the perfect signing to bring in here to New England to be that bridge quarterback, because I think he is basically the ideal bridge quarterback in the league. And I don't think the fact that they were able to get Drake May with the number 3 pick should really force them to deviate from that plan, at least for the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season. I talked about this earlier with Mac Jones, but I think we've seen it, potentially as recently with Bryce Young. But, there's tons of examples of young quarterbacks that show promise, but come into the league behind bad offensive lines with a lack of, separating playmakers, with bad play calling potentially, and just don't trust things. They don't trust their wide receivers. They stop playing on time. They get into hero ball, and, instead of throwing that tight window throw or letting the ball go with anticipation before the receiver is open, they start to doubt those things. And then you also get into bad pass protection. You see guys can go, like Carson Wentz is the prime example of this. Guys can go from great pocket presence out the gate where they're managing pressure and stepping up and trusting their protection around them, to quarterbacks like Wentz, like what we saw from Mac Jones last year as well, where if they don't trust the pass protection, they can start to dip their head, look at the rush, and then they're just not seeing the field, right? So you've got those tangible aspects of how you can really break a young quarterback. And then, look, confidence is a huge thing at this position too. I believe in that as well. So I think it's a real thing that you can break a young quarterback. And until the Patriots can get some answers on some of this stuff, the play calling, the young weaponry, the offensive line, all stuff that we're going to talk about here, and we already have talked about the play calling. Until they can get those answers, there is no reason to put the 21-year-old Drake May out there, especially the guy that, he's got some footwork stuff to clean up that you're hoping that a good quarterback coach like Alex Van Pelt can clean up in the process. So for me, the no-brainer here is, even if Drake May looks better in camp, which I think that's very possible, he could make some throws in camp, and even in terms of understanding the offense, commanding the huddle, he could look ahead of what you might have even expected, because I'm really high on Drake May, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about him. But even if you're tempted to play him, I think it would be a catastrophic mistake to put him out there, at least until they can go through a month of football and get some answers on some of this stuff. Now, Drake May deserves some analysis of his own here. I just talked about this with the Commanders deep dive, but I was personally stunned that an NFL team passed on Drake May to take the older, honestly, less refined passer in Jaden Daniels, and certainly the lower upside passer in Jaden Daniels. I mean, Drake May is a phenomenal, high-profile, projectable sort of should be in consideration for the number one pick in many drafts type of prospect. And to get that player with the number 3 pick in the draft is, in my opinion, a gift. Just from a starting point, legit elite arm talent. He can utilize the entire field. The way he can throw a deep out from, the opposite hash. It's exactly what coaches dream about, to be able to threaten the entire field at any given moment from your quarterback because of that arm talent. He can hit incredible tight window throws. He can launch 60, 65-yard deep balls and really stretch the field. And even when his anticipation's a little bit later on some of his hitch routes and comebacks and digs, it can make up for it in a way that we talked about with Jaden Daniels. He needs to be a little bit more on time. With a guy like Drake May, he can be a quarter of a second later to see it in the velocity on his fastball and make up for that kind of stuff. That stuff really matters. And then in terms of processing, decision-making, he makes his mistakes. He'll throw the ball to a linebacker, or, think he can get the ball over the top of a curl flat defender, like what happened in that Minnesota game. And, he needs to learn to, maybe throw those balls a little more touch at times. There's certain throws where he has learning moments, and will have to continue to develop in terms of processing and developing. But for a 21-year-old prospect, it's much more of a strength than it is a weakness. In fact, he reminds me a lot of Trevor Lawrence in that way. And, some people laugh at that because Trevor had a down year last year, but I see a very similar type of product where the majority of his process is very good. And then there's just the occasional bad read and the occasional throw where, he thinks he can fit the ball into a window that isn't there because he's got that elite arm strength. So to me, his processing and decision-making is more of a plus than a negative, because he is so young, and it's not bad. He does get through his progressions and make some really high-level NFL throws, NFL reads. And then you get into the play extension stuff. Like, he's an incredible athlete at his size. He's got speed. He was second in college football, I think, behind Jaden Daniels in terms of scrambles and first downs picked up. But unlike Jaden Daniels, Drake May, when he scrambles, he keeps his head up and he sees throws down the field and completes passes that just aren't available to a guy like Jaden Daniels and a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL. So in structure, out of structure, he's got a ton of answers. Now, the knocks on him are the accuracy. I think it's there. The accuracy issues are there, but I think they have become dramatically overstated from Drake May. I think people act like this guy sails every deep ball he throws, and that's just not the case. I think he does have mechanics issues. He throws off his back foot. He's very Jordan Lovian in that way, and Jordan Love had a lot of these issues coming out too, where he felt like with his arm he could make every throw in the book, and he could just throw off his back foot, and you can't. Like, better mechanics will go a long way, but I think that's very reasonable to think better mechanics can come for a 21-year-old getting NFL coaching. And I think you'll see what were already pretty overstated accuracy issues improve. Honestly, the one thing that is a legitimate knockback for me on Drake May is I'm not sold on his sort of pocket presence, his ability to feel the rush, to, manage that space within the pocket where, you do see Drake May kind of bail out of clean pockets at times, or he has that clock in his head where he'll drop back in the pocket and then, if he doesn't like what he sees at first, he kind of does, I don't want to say panics, but he does get a little bit uncomfortable with his feet. And it's like, I don't know that he's necessarily feeling that space in the way that so many of the elite quarterbacks in the league do. And that's something that I think can hold some quarterbacks back from being that, taking that jump from a tier 2 quarterback to being that elite guy. And I've actually said the same thing about a guy like Trevor Lawrence or a Justin Herbert. I see a lot of that similar stuff in Drake May. So to me, those are the 3 quarterbacks that you hear brought up a lot with Drake May: Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, and Trevor Lawrence. I think any number of those players would be an ideal outcome for Drake May as the number 3 pick in the draft. Hence why I think it was such a big deal that they got him at number 3. But Drake May is certainly not a bust-proof quarterback, as essentially no quarterback is. And again, I think it's a very unstable situation if you were to put him in there. And you could be blowing a great opportunity to develop a franchise quarterback here in Drake May. So there's your quarterback room. I think with Jacoby and Drake May, who I don't think would be too far behind him if he were to start as a rookie, doesn't rank you last in the league, but it certainly, you're not coming into the 2024 season expecting exceptional quarterback play in New England, and that's not really a huge take. But I do think it's better than it was last year. I'll say that, because Mac Jones was boo-boo, as was Bailey Zappi, still in the room as a backup. And then he got Joe Milton. Look, I don't have it in me to spend a lot of time talking about Joe Milton. He is a 6th-year, 24-year-old quarterback that still cannot hit the broadside of the barn. I mean, talk about a guy with no pocket feel, a first read and run and scramble quarterback through and through. Processing, decision-making was abysmal, to put it lightly, at Michigan. And then he goes to the Tennessee system that is, that stack spread, easy as hell to read out type of offense. They run like 15 plays in that offense, and they make it work. He had to go to that system to just not throw a bunch of picks, basically. You look at what the Michigan offense was when he left, when they put in McCarthy. I mean, I don't think he's a quarterback. And I think at his age, I get it. He's got a dream of being an NFL quarterback, and who am I to tell you to stop going after your dreams? But look, I legitimately think he could be a starting tight end in the NFL. He's a great athlete. He's got the size for it. I think his background as a quarterback would help him in the receiving game. But you got to get the ball rolling on that. Like, he's already 24. So to me, I know he's out there saying, I will never switch to tight end. It's like, well, would you rather do that or be a UFL backup next year? Because that's really the caliber quarterback he is right now. So we'll see where that goes, and if he eventually caves to go and switch to tight end, because that's, to me, is where his brightest future would be. But let's transition to the rest of this offensive roster that I'm obviously not very optimistic about. In terms of weaponry, I've got a C- ranking on him, which is tied for worst in the league, and I don't think that's really controversial either. Your best weapon is Kendrick Bourne, who is a 29-year-old wide receiver who lacked long speed to begin with, coming off an ACL injury. So that's their best weapon. I like Kendrick Bourne. He's really tough over the middle of the field. I think you could argue his skill set is redundant with Jalen Polk, where he's best running slants, crossers, digs, coming down with tough catches over the middle, breaking a tackle, kind of existing in that part of the field. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how those skill sets work together, even, down the depth chart. KJ Osborne, Juju Smith-Schuster, those guys are all kind of the same style in terms of where they win, how they win. So you've got a lot of redundancy there. But look, I like Kendrick Bourne as a wide receiver 3, as your Jawan Jennings, as your, kind of supercharged KJ Osborne for the Vikings. Like, plug him into Miami where they've got Odell Beckham, or where, Tyler Boyd's been for the Bengals. Like, that's what Kendrick Bourne should be, not your number 1 wide receiver coming off an ACL. So that's where you're starting with this group. If healthy, again, he's a fine player. But then kind of the only juice, like literally the only juice, unless you go down to Tyquan Thornton, who we'll get to, but the only juice you're kind of counting on here, because you're not really counting on Tyquan Thornton, is Deuce Douglas. And he's fun, man. I really don't have a bad word to say about Deuce Douglas, other than the fact that he's tiny, he's got a small catch radius, not a good contested catch guy. Like, very unlikely this dude's ever going to be a number 1, and maybe it'll be hard for him to be like a legit number 2. I think he can be a good starter as a part of 3 within the role that he plays, a lot of slot. But you can kind of stack him on the outside, play him off the line. He can beat press, but matchups, certain matchups could be a little harder for him. But he does win on the outside. He really understands leverage within his routes and setting guys up. His foot speed's impeccable. Good hands. He catches everything. It's just, when he's got a body draped on him, he doesn't have a play strength or catch radius to win a lot of tough catches, but you've got a bunch of other guys to be those trust throw dudes. Douglas is the guy that they're really counting on. If they're getting press man coverage and it's 3rd and 6 and they need a guy to get open quickly against the blitz, Deuce Douglas is going to be that guy for him. He's also a great manufactured touch guy. Throw him a bubble screen, get the ball in his hands. He's a fun player, man. I had a ton of fun watching his film. I would certainly wager that from a fantasy football lens, he leads this team in receptions and yards. Maybe not touchdowns, but to me, he's the guy that if I'm trying to get something going for this offense and find some easy buttons for the quarterback, whether it's Jacoby or Drake May, he's the guy that's going to get open. So I like him a lot. I just think he has obvious shortcomings in terms of his upside, but he's probably the rosiest outlook I'm going to paint on these guys, because I think he is the clearest projection as a long-term starter for this team. Then they take Jalen Polk very early in the draft, like the 36th pick in the draft. They trade down when there was other receivers on the board, and they go with Polk, who, I'm not going to lie, that was a little early for me. I had him as more of a 3rd-round type of guy. I mentioned it already, but he's got a lot of Kendrick Bourne-esque skills to him, where he's certainly not the fastest guy. He's not the most, fleet of foot, exceptional route runner or anything like that. But, you put him on a dig against zone coverage, or you run play action and ask him to come across the field behind the linebackers, win tough catches over the middle of the field, box guys out, run block, do some good stuff after the catch, can win some back shoulders, can win some hitch routes. Like, he can do those things and prove to be, I think, a Kendrick Bourne level starter. I think he brings a very good floor to this wide receiver group. It's just, in this wide receiver class, I talked about this in my draft grades, but I think there was guys that could have brought them a little bit more upside, whether it wasn't trading down and taking Ladd McConkey or taking a swing on an Adonai Mitchell or something like that. I do think with Bourne and Osborne and even Juju, there were skill sets that can do what Jalen Polk does here, but he is a very solid player. I think he'll have a very capable rookie season. Call it 45 receptions, 500 yards, 4 or 5 touchdowns. He can go a little bit up from there, and maybe in time, Polk and Douglas can be a good 2-3 punch, and maybe someday they can find a true number 1 wide receiver here. Then you do have KJ Osborne here. He was a necessary signing when they brought him in. Bourne's still recovering from that ACL. They hadn't had the draft yet. I would imagine he'll slot in as the wide receiver 4, which I think is probably the best role for him. He is a very low-end 3. He had some games for the Vikings where he would go off when teams were focusing on Jefferson and Addison and Hawkinson. And even, you know, he had some good games too when Jefferson wasn't out there. But he drops stuff, and he's not this great route runner. He's not really going to get open unless it's schemed up offense, really. Not a guy you want lining up man-to-man and shaking good corners or anything like that. So, you know, matchups are going to be important for him, but a lot of times it's just like he'll have bad games where drops just become an issue for him. So, you know, as a wide receiver 4, he's very good depth. He's a better wide receiver 4 than a lot of teams have, but if he's your wide receiver 3, a lot of teams are going to have a better guy than that. So that type of deal. You do still have Juju here. There's major concerns about his kind of physical regression with his knee, I think it is. We definitely saw that last year after he signed here from Kansas City. You know, his fall off has definitely been pretty sharp. I think when you have Bourne and Polk and Osborne here, the opportunities for Juju are pretty slim. Wouldn't be surprised if he gets cut here. But I don't think he's completely done either. And last year's offense was a complete wasteland as well. So if he can get healthy, he can emerge as a capable starter again for this team. But that's kind of a long shot at this point. Kind of a wait and see, honestly, on Juju. And then Javon Baker, this was a really good pick. I mean, he's a potential starting outside wide receiver for this team. And if you just want to talk about skill sets with these 3 young guys, it does add up where, you know, Deuce is your slot gadget guy. Polk is your physical short to intermediate guy. And then a guy like Javon Baker can really be that, you know, honestly, kind of an wide receiver where he's working the sidelines, go balls, comebackers, hitches, digs. That's Javon Baker. He's very good at it. He's a 4th-round pick for a reason. He's not the biggest guy. He's not the fastest guy. He's got good speed, good size. In another wide receiver class, might have been a top 10 guy or so, but he definitely got pushed down the board a little bit in this class. Was a good draft pick when they made it. And I think between him and Tyquan Thornton, those guys do make sense with the skill sets of their other young wide receivers. And I'm going to continue to give Tyquan Thornton one more chance here because he's had injuries. He's had a hard time staying on the field. And the second the Patriots drafted him, it's not that I thought he was drafted terribly early. I actually had a 2nd-round grade on Thornton. I thought his Baylor tape was really good. He's got great speed. He's a better route runner than he gets credit for. He's had some drops, but that was never really an issue for him at Baylor, and he's made some tough catches at times. He even blocks his ass off as a run blocker, so you like that from him on the outside. But the second he got drafted to the Patriots, it's like, dude, Mac Jones and this offensive staff is not going to know how to use this guy. He just doesn't get quality deep targets. Well, maybe he can now. With a play-action-oriented offense, with good deep ball throwers like Brissett and Drake May, I'm going to give him another year. I know he's had his issues, and you're certainly not counting on him, but theoretically, if Baker or Thornton can become hits, 2nd-round pick and a 4th-round pick in recent years, you could have vertical players there with Baker and Thornton, with the other 2 guys, Deuce Douglas and Jalen Polk, making up maybe not the most incredible receiving core, but at least a logical distribution of skill sets in terms of how these guys should be used. So I like that they at least have some decent dart throws with a little bit more verticality in them. But Baker and Thornton, I think, are going to have to earn those opportunities. And until they're playing, they don't really have a guy that I trust beyond 20 yards down the field. And that's a huge reason why you can't put Drake May out there right away, because the deep ball was a huge part of what Drake May did well at North Carolina. So to me, those are your 7. I think they could get away with putting Keyshawn Boutte on the practice squad. I just don't know who else is all that interested in him. Jalen Reagor, maybe makes the team as a return guy if Juju can't really go. But Quan Baker's probably a practice squad stash there. So I do think they keep 7 because they just need these guys to kind of provide answers and move these guys around and see what sticks. but it is, I think, the worst wide receiver room in the league. Now, they have some other pieces in here that are solid in the tight end room and the running back room. Hunter Henry is a perfectly good, call him top 15 tight end in the league. I think he is the poster boy for the possession tight end, unless you wanted to go a step up to like Dallas Goedert, but just a guy that can play in line. He's not the best blocker. He's not the best athlete, but a reliable pair of hands, a big body that can be a good contested catch target, and, you know, third and shorts, red zone. Henry, I think, you know, he's only 29 years old. I think he revived his career a little bit. I really do. He made some really nice catches last year. It felt like he was trending down. I think he got it back a little bit. There's no reason to believe he can't be a very solid to good tight end for them. They sign Austin Hooper, who's kind of in his rightful home as a tight end too. He's just a poor man's Hunter Henry, so they can go to 12 personnel and get by with those two guys out there, lean on the run game a little bit early on. I think that's fine. Jaheim Bell as well as a third tight end. I think that's a great role for him coming into the league, especially in a system like this that, at least if you're thinking this is going to be like Kevin Stefanski's offense in Cleveland, with Van Pelt coming over there, they got really good at leaning into those tight ends off of play action to get them easy manufactured touches and lean into their run after catch ability. You know, Jaheim Bell has David Njoku skills about him in terms of the speed and run after catch. He's not quite as explosive after the catch as Njoku, but I do think in that sort of maybe Jonnu Smith role, that could exist in this system, depending on how Van Pelt wants to call it. So I definitely have my eyes on him. Could be a nifty little playmaker for them. And then I think Wilcox probably makes the team as tight end 4. He's kind of bounced around the practice squad and the roster in Cincinnati over the last few years. And then again, Joe Milton, is he a part of this tight end room? Maybe not this year, but down the road, that's what I'd be doing with him. So keep an eye on him. Again, I think he could be a starting tight end in the NFL if he wanted to commit to it. And then you got some solid options in the receiving game for the running backs as well. I do still think Ramondre Stevenson is the primary third down back. He's an incredible pass protector. And, you know, he has some drops, but he's actually very good on dump-offs and screens. He's really good in space. You know, for any sort of undersized corner or slot corner, he is really challenging to get down. So, to me, he is still going to be the primary receiving back, though it's going to be pretty close to a 50-50 split, as it was with Stevenson and Zeke last year. Gibson is an upgrade in the receiving game to what Zeke was last year. You know, Gibson's really explosive. He's got experience as a wide receiver. He gives you a little bit of something that they didn't have with Stevenson and Zeke, where if they want to go empty or they want to put Gibson out as a wide receiver and get a little creative to put a guy like Douglas into the backfield and do some of this, you know, a lot of coordinators are doing stuff like that lately. You know, Gibson does give you a little bit more flexibility in terms of actual route running and verticality and tracking the ball and actual receiver skills, whereas Stevenson is more of a pass protector and a dump off and a screen threat. But I did like that signing because I think in this role, that's a good spot for him. Jermichael Hasty as well has checked some boxes in the receiving game in his stops in the league. So they certainly are not hurting for short to intermediate targets, but, you know, teams are just going to live in single high, dare this team to throw deep, leave these receivers on an island outside. And, you know, it's going to make things harder on the quarterbacks, on the short to intermediate targets, on the run game. Until they can really stretch the defense out a little bit, this is going to be one of the least dynamic, explosive groups of weapons in the league. And that's, you know, the idea that Baker and Thornton specifically are so unproven. Even Jalen Polk, if you want to use him as an outside X wide receiver, you know, those guys are so unproven. That's a key factor in why I don't want Drake May playing right away. You know, if you get 6 weeks in and one of those guys looks pretty solid, then you'd feel much better about it, right? So that's something to keep an eye on, is the verticality elements of this offense, and can somebody step up there? But let's talk about these running backs a little bit more in terms of their actual running ability. And, you know, pretty good there. I've got them kind of smack dab in the middle of the league, a B- ranking, in that 12th to 19th ranked tier. Ramondre Stevenson doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. I think he's, a top 15 to 19 running back in the league, obviously. He's got a lot of talent. He's at his best as a no-nonsense, north and south, gap runner. Get behind a pulling guard, trust the blocking, hit it hard, and then hopefully he can use that great contact balance he has to shake a linebacker, fight for some tough yardage. He's got pretty good speed, too. He's had some really impressive breakaway runs. They can run outside zone with him, but certainly not his, specialty. But yeah, I really don't have any bad words to say about Ramondre Stevenson. He's proven to be a very capable stud starting running back in the league. I think he has a really good season. Wish things could be opened up a little bit more for him. I think he's going to face a lot of crowded boxes and is going to have some bad games for that reason. But he's a really good player, man. And I believe heading into a contract year and, maybe a little extra motivation, could have a good year, get a nice contract extension. I think he is... I feel like one of the biggest compliments we can give a running back these days is he's good enough that I'd give him a second contract. I think I would give Ramondre Stevenson a second contract. Then you got Antonio Gibson. He's a good relief back. I think he firmly planted himself into that role with Washington last year where he's at his best as a change of pace runner. You can bring him in for wide zone or shotgun runs. If you want to run a draw or trap and, he doesn't have a ton of blockers or defenders in front of him to read out, he can use his athleticism and give you some explosiveness. But he's got some of the worst vision of any back that gets any semblance of a significant workload in the NFL. A guy with his physical tools should have emerged as a star running back by now, and it just hasn't happened for Gibson. He's also got to get better at protecting the football. 6 fumbles last year, so obviously can't be doing that. But as a backup, very solid. You got Kevin Harris, who's a poor man's Ramondre Stevenson, north and south, no-nonsense runner. Probably never going to be a starter in the league, but as an RB3, you're fine with it. And then JaMycal Hasty is a good backup, too. I'm more excited about him than Harris. He's a guy that probably doesn't necessarily have the power, the size, or the vision to be a starter, but he has had some really good games. He's got some speed. He's a really good outside zone runner. So, if they want to get to more of that, there is some of that background with the Stefanski offense, at least going back to the early 2020, 2021 days of that offense. They've become much more of a power scheme lately. But again, if they want to run wide zone, I think JaMycal Hasty is worthy of giving some handoffs there. In terms of the quarterback run multiplier, this certainly isn't quite what we talked about with the Commanders and Jaden Daniels. They don't get a multiplier from this group, at least with Jacoby in there. Maybe a little bit more with Drake May, who is really fleet of foot, would be a good threat off of read options to at least keep you honest on some of that stuff. But a big part of the reason this is a non-multiplier as opposed to like a low-level multiplier is that Kevin Stefanski, that system, that offense really hasn't proved that they can successfully tap into the QB run game a whole lot. And I just don't expect that to be a huge part of the picture here. Now, Joe Milton is someone to keep an eye on there. I think if they're just trying to get through this year and figure out some stuff, Joe Milton in a Taysom Hill type of role as a Wildcat quarterback could actually be a legitimate multiplier to this offense. That's something I'm very curious to see if they want to tap into that. Like, if you could give me 100-1 odds that Joe Milton gets a snap at quarterback for this Patriots team before Drake May, I might take that because I don't think that'd be a bad idea for this Patriots team. But that's not something that is factored into their ranking here, but it's something that I would be experimenting with what I think this version of the Patriots offense could be this season. But overall, a good running back room. A lot of the load going to be carried by Ramondre Stevenson this year. And I think he's a slight elevator to the run game as opposed to just kind of a so-so, not going to hurt you, not going to help you type. I think he's good. But we've got the offensive line next. And there's some questions here, but it's not a horrible offensive line. I think being fresh off the Commanders episode and obviously the Daniels, Drake May, being kind of a focal point of our early deep dives here, I think whereas the weaponry in Washington is significantly better, I do think the offensive line in New England is set up better than what Jaden Daniels has. So at least for Drake May's sake, there's hope enough that this can be a serviceable kind of league average group for the Patriots this year if you're going to get to Drake May 6 weeks into the season. But again, there's still some questions here. So at left tackle, they signed Chukwuma Okorafor. I think he starts at left tackle. And he's not so much like if this makes any sense, a short-term question as much as he is a long-term question. Like, you know what he is? He's started a lot of games for the Steelers. He's been very consistently about the 27th best left tackle in the NFL. And that's, I think, what you're expecting from him, where he doesn't suck, but from an efficiency standpoint, you can expect one or two up to upwards of, a couple really bad games, where you might get 4 or 5 pressures from him, but he's a guy that you expect will be beat throughout the course of the game, but not going to get beat as much as Vidarian Lowe was last year. You know what I'm saying? So, like, he's an okay enough short-term answer for them at left tackle. Run game as well, he's fine, but he's not a great athlete. He doesn't move a ton of dudes. The Steelers have not had great run blocking for a long time, and Okorafor's been a part of that. He's fine. Ideally, he'd be a swing tackle, but if you need to start him, as you figure some stuff out, it's to me better than counting on a third-round pick in Caden Wallace that was pretty drastically overdrafted. Honestly, a best-case scenario projection on a guy like Caden Wallace is probably someone like Chukwuma Okorafor, where he's got okay traits, pretty good size, just not a great athlete. And, if his technique can come along, he can be a potential low-end starter for you. So I would rather count on the guy that has proved to be that player over the course of 4 or 5 seasons as opposed to the third-round rookie that you're hoping to be that guy. I would say maybe Caden Wallace proves to be more than that, but I just don't really see where the upside is in him. He's one of those guys that's really built more like a guard, just doesn't have the ideal foot speed to project as a high-end tackle. I think you would say the same thing about Okorafor. But at left guard, you got Cole Strange, who, was he overdrafted in the first round a few years ago? Yeah, probably. He hasn't been a dominant guard, which, you draft a guard in the first round, you're kind of hoping he will be. But he certainly hasn't been a bust either. He's pretty solid in both phases. I think there's still room to grow, but I don't even know how much you're totally counting on him to become a stud for you as much as you're just like, yeah, he's a starting caliber guard on a cheap rookie contract, although not that cheap being a first-round pick, but you're looking at him and saying you can create some drive. He's got some good mobility if you want to run wide zone, run game stuff, and he can relatively hold his own in pass protection, right? So in terms of the left side of the line, you can expect some losses, but there will be worst combinations of left guards and left tackles that we see this year as well. Then you go to center. David Andrews has been a mainstay for this team. He's done a good job to extend his career after some injury concerns there a couple years ago. But coming off those injury concerns, he made it through the whole season, but did have by far the worst year of his career in terms of letting up pressures, letting guys cross his face, showing some signs of regression in pass protection. He is 32 years old. He's also only 6'3", 300 pounds. So, he's just not someone you're counting on to be a stud anymore, but I still think has a year of good football left in him. And you're really hoping that can hold up and he can stay healthy because they don't really have much of an answer at center. They drafted Jake Andrews in the 4th round last year. I don't think he's quite ready. So there's minor questions on David Andrews, but you feel pretty good about him there at center. And then Sidney Sow at right guard might be the most polarizing starter in the league. He is a year 2 guy, 4th round pick out of Eastern Michigan, I think. Pretty damn good run blocker for a young player. That was all over his film at Eastern Michigan. That's what you were betting on, was his athleticism, his tenacity, getting to the second level or putting him on a pole block. He's good. Like, I get why Patriots fans are excited about him in that phase. But if you're talking about a guy that can survive in pass protection and not be a turnstile for Drake May or even Jacoby Brissett. Like, there was no signs from Sidy Sow in his rookie year that that was going to be him. He had a lot of problems, man, whether it was blitz pickup, leaning in pass protection, stopping his feet, was really towards the bottom in terms of pass blocking efficiency for guards. So I love what he does on the run game, undoubtedly. And I think the arrow's pointing up. You can coach these guys up. You know, he's got all the size and athletic ability. I think the tenacity and the work ethic to get there, but you need it to get there. He can't be what he was as a rookie if you're going to have confidence in him for a young quarterback. And he's very much one of those pivot players where put him out there for the first 5-6 weeks, see if that pass protection has developed before you lean on a Drake May, because that's the type of stuff that matters. But then Mike Onwenu, much less to say about him. He, I think, will be playing right tackle for them, considering they don't really have anybody else at tackle. I mean, there's a world where they like Caden Wallace as a right tackle and want to move Onwenu back into guard. I still think long-term, Onwenu is one of these guys where he's a good tackle, but could really be like an all-pro guard. So, you know, maybe someday they move him back inside, but he's had enough reps at this point of being a good tackle in the league that you're comfortable enough keeping him out there. You love that flexibility. I love that they brought him back. That was certainly a necessity for this team. Now, he is 6'3", 340 pounds, was a guard at Michigan, and he just doesn't have a ton of range. So he is a bit of a matchup problem, and you know, if he has to go against maybe like Hassan Reddick on the Jets now would be a great example, but or Chop Robinson as well, going to the Dolphins. There's actually a couple specific guys now in this division that have that screaming speed to bend around the corner. You know, those are matchups to really watch for Mike Onwenu. How can he handle that? And do the Patriots use guys like Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper and Ramondre Stevenson to help him out around the corner there? So it's really those specific matchups can give him problems. He's got a great anchor. Power's not going through him. He's got good technique. So he's a good player. Even better as a run blocker than he is in pass protection. But he's certainly where you have the least questions on this offensive line there at Mike Onwenu. In terms of the rest of the depth, you know, we talked about Caden Wallace, mentioned Vidarian Lowe was a guy they traded for from the Vikings. He looks the part. He's got ridiculous 35.5-inch arms. He's got the size, the athleticism, but technique-wise, it's just a disaster. Andrew Schwaber, I think, was a 7th-round pick out of Michigan, had huge anchor concerns. He hasn't really played for them. Calvin Anderson is a guy that's played in the league. Had a good year, I think, 2 years ago for the Broncos. The Patriots signed him last year, and he was really a problem when he played. So he's at least a backup to keep an eye on. And then Tyrone Wheatley, they traded for from Cleveland. He's yet to get NFL reps, but someone with some traits that's been developing. You know, maybe he can climb the ranks here. In terms of the interior depth, you know, Jake Andrews, year 2, a 4th-round pick last year. He is very similar, physically speaking, to David Andrews. I just don't know if he's as strong as David Andrews. So, you know, I never really saw him as a starting upside guy. I was a little worried he was overdrafted in the 4th round when they took him, just because I just didn't think he had starter traits in him. Layden Robinson, though, kind of the opposite, where he's a total project with great traits. He's good insurance to a guy like Sidy Sow. A good dart throw in the 4th round, a guy with some traits. There were certainly other players. Like, man, I would have much preferred this team stayed with the other Penn State guy and stuck with that O-line and got a Hunter Norzad or something. But Robinson does have the traits to potentially develop. Antonio Mafi kind of in that realm as well. Hyper-athletic dude, good run blocker, but abysmal technique. I also have Nick Leverett, who started a lot of games for Tom Brady's offensive lineman in 2022 and was serviceable-ish, I guess, as a pass protector. But how much of that was Tom Brady just protecting him by getting rid of the ball? You know, Michael Jordan is still making NFL camps, not the basketball player. This is the guy that got Joe Burrow hurt in his rookie season, and he's still been bad everywhere he's played. So I don't think he makes the team. But they did pick up Charles Turner. Was a nice undrafted pickup there. Good pass protector at LSU. could get in the mix as a backup center for this team. Someone to keep an eye on there, I suppose. But yeah, they are pretty low in terms of offensive line depth. There's a lot of guys they've kind of invested in that they're hoping can take strides. If 2 or 3 of these guys do develop into capable backups, that shouldn't be a surprise. It's just a little difficult to say necessarily who that would be here. And it's another situation where they've got to kind of sort through that before they put May in there. In terms of the overall offensive line, again, it's close to an average group, but certainly some questions to be answered before you say it's definitely an average group. The main questions are going to be, what does David Andrews look like at 32 years old? Can City So take a step up? And, if you get to week 4, week 5, and you feel pretty good about the answers to those questions, I think at least from an offensive line perspective, you can say, all right, we got a good enough group here to keep Drake May upright. I know we keep bringing that point up here as we transition to the offensive summary, but that is really what this season is all about for the Patriots. And I think it's important to point out kind of where we should wait and see a little bit on this offense. But there's your offensive recap. It's not a huge surprise here, but they do come in as my 32nd ranked offense. Just too many questions here. The lack of really proven coaching in any regard and weaponry is a major concern when you're talking about Jacoby Brissett is the quarterback, and it's not like the offensive line's in great shape either. So I really don't think anybody disagrees that this is the worst surrounding cast for any quarterback or offense in the league, and they got to answer some of these questions, man. It's an obvious priority for this team. Now, this defense is a lot more fun to talk about, and honestly, a lot less questions. So let's get into it. Let's have some fun with this defense, because I actually think this is one of the more underrated units in the league. And a lot of people were surprised that the Patriots weren't my number 32 team. Well, that's because I think this is at least a top half defense in the league. And if Gerard Mayo can be a good coach, doesn't even need to have to be necessarily what Belichick was, but we have him ranked as a B- coach. If he can be a B+ coach, like, this could be a top 10 to 8 defense this year. So let's get into the roster side of this. The D-line's really good. They're kind of like a top half plus-ish D-line. They come in 13th overall for the whole D-line, 14th to 17th for pass rush, and in the top 12 for run defense. They know what they have. They know how to use these guys, what roles each specific guy is going to play, and it's really not a lot of turnover with this group. The main thing you're looking at is Lawrence Guy, no longer a part of this group, and they bring in a veteran Armon Watts, which, again, as we said earlier, it's kind of a push here, but it's kind of like, where do you want to start? I feel like we already broke down how versatile this front is in the scheme portion, but let's start outside in here with the edge group. That sort of unique combination of outside backers that they have here. And there's really 3 starters here. Your primary number 1 guy is going to be Matthew Judon, who is coming off a torn bicep from last year, but I feel better about a guy recovering from a torn bicep at his age. I think he's 31. Than I do if it were an Achilles or an ACL. So I don't quite have the injury concerns on Judon, but he's got to be one of the more complete edge rushers in the league in terms of nasty run defender, great size, great length, great effort, great technique, you name it, and being a stud pass rusher as well. I think at times his sack production gets pretty high in this system with how they stunt him up. They run a lot of games and Belichick's blitzes, and this system can help these guys out a lot. So, I think Patriots fans talk very highly about Matthew Judon, and you should. He's a stud, but, is he a true number 1? No. Like, are you going to line him up against the game's best tackles and expect him to win consistently? No. He's been pretty consistently about a 15% pass rush win rate type of guy. Again, elevated by the scheme a little bit in terms of pressures and sacks. So that's like a good number 2 edge rusher in terms of pass rushing profile that adds on run defense, leadership, the ability to be a weapon on stunts, because he can also be the guy that blows up a couple guys and creates looping opportunities for other players, not to mention the coverage side of things. He's a great player for this team, and you could feel the difference when they signed him. They were missing a guy like him, and getting him back is a big deal for this defense. So it's a little bit of a tough conversation, and this doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I think I just broke down pretty well what type of player he is, but I feel like Patriots fans overrate him a little bit, but the general, like, I think Patriots fans overrate him because the general football world doesn't really realize how good he is. So that's where we're at on Judon. Excited for him to be back. And then, you know, he's going to be the primary snap getter. You know, he'll play for the most part all 3 downs unless he needs a little hit on the, you know, oxygen mask. But Uche and Jennings are going to be more of that true early down, later down rotation situation here, where Jennings broke out last year, was waiting on Bill to give him that workload, because I loved Anthony Jennings for this system when they took him, and they took Jennings and Uche in the same draft class together. And it's fun to see these guys continue to kind of play off their skill sets so well. You know, Jennings is coming out of Alabama. He's not entirely dissimilar from what Donta Hightower was for this team. He's not Donta Hightower. He can't really play middle linebacker in the way that Hightower could, and he's not as good of a pass rusher as Hightower was. But in terms of just being that nasty, thumping, on-ball linebacker that can play 5-tech, 7-tech, detonate a tackle, detonate a tight end, and just set a hard edge, he is up there around the top 10 in terms of just edge run defenders, in my opinion. He's phenomenal, and he totally broke out last year, earned that playing time, and didn't really look back. Now, they'll take him off the field a little bit more on later downs because he's not the best athlete. He doesn't have this high variety of pass rush moves. He can win with a bull rush. It's just few and far between, and that's kind of what he likes to go to. But that's what's so great about this system and this coaching staff that you're assuming is going to continue. Managing the rotation is another thing Belichick was so good at that Mayo's going to have to prove he can do as well. So it's a note, but I don't see any reason he can't manage that. But Josh Uche will come in for pass rush downs. And Uche was strangely quiet last year after a monster 2022 campaign where he was looking like a Hassan Reddick, you know, type of dominant designated pass rusher. I mean, his speed, his spin move, his bend, he's a relentless speed rusher off the edge. And while he's not so much the run defender and you know, they don't play him a ton on early downs, he's also a really gifted mover in space and provides some of that coverage drop flexibility as well. He dropped about 11% of his snaps off the edge last year. And even if he didn't replicate the 56 pressure, 12 sack season he had in 2022, he still did put up 37 pressures, only 3 sacks, but still on only 227 pass rush snaps. So, you know, in general, if you can get a guy at a 10% pressure rate, that's a pretty good number. Uche is looking at more like 15, 16%. So he's still up there in terms of getting after the quarterback. And even if you could just average out his 2022 season and his 2023 season, he's an impactful designated pass rusher for them. So I think him returning to New England was really exciting. It's hard to fully explain what happened last year. You know, his snap count started to reduce in the middle of the season when Judon was gone. You know, it felt like they kind of got away from some of the stuff they did well. And of course, Uche had to, you know, get a little bit more attention. So, you know, I think just kind of betting on him returning to what he was in 2022, coming back here on a cheap contract. He agreed to come back for just 1 year, $3 million. By all accounts, he could have gotten more elsewhere. And I like him betting on himself and potentially having a re-breakout here. But he is a little bit of a wild card because that one big 2022 season he had was a little bit of an outlier on his career. So either way you slice it, I think that's a really fun edge group. And then you kind of work your way in with this front with your sort of hybrid end types. You've got two of them now with Dietrich Wise and Keon White. Wise not getting any younger, coming off a down year last year. Keon White, the rookie who was kind of getting acclimated last year but showed his flashes, I think trending up. And basically this role will put his hand in the dirt, play some edge, play some 5-tech, but going to do a lot of rushing as a 3-tech and a 4-eye as well on later downs. But really, Wise and White are going to play anything from a outside shade of the guard to an outside shade of the tackle. And in that 3-3-5 front, they can kind of play head up on the tackle. And both these guys are good run defenders in that role. Gap shooters, one-on-one penetrators, good enough technique to kind of stack, peek, shed. Not dominant players, but specific hybrid ends that are perfect for this system. In terms of the pass rushing, it's hard to say. Wise is not heading in the right direction, turns 30 years old this year. Kind of a similar story with Uche, where 2022 was a monster season, but after, with Judon going down early, Wise just wasn't quite as good. Didn't quite see him generating that bull rush and creating the pressure in the backfield like he did. So I don't know if he lost a little bit of, half a gear or what's going on there. But I just think it's safe to say he's going to continue to be a capable player. You hope you can get one more good year out of him, and you hope Keon White can really show to be the replacement to this player in time. As far as White is concerned, I loved this landing spot because this is the exact role that White should be playing. He is that hybrid end. He's, like 6'5", 290 pounds. Can't really play him as a D tackle, can't really play him as an edge, but can certainly play him in this role. So, I do, even though I wasn't high on Keon White coming out, when he went to the Patriots, knowing how they were going to use him, I kind of became high on him in this specific fit. So for him, it's like he's got to learn to more consistently connect, I think, on that bull rush, really generate that first step power. Was something he struggled with at Georgia Tech, and his pass rush wins very much just come in flashes at this point, but I think, he's got a push-pull swim move he can work on. There's just a variety of technical things that he can improve to be a better pass rusher. And, the run defense from him, I think, in this role is going to be solid, as it was as a rookie. So you certainly have a logical succession plan there, but in terms of this season, are you going to get the best version of either of these two players, with Wise trending down and White still maybe a year removed from being a true starter for this team? It's certainly possible, but I like the combination of those two players in that role regardless. Then Christian Barmore is just a stud 3-tech defensive tackle. You don't need me to break down how they use him. They don't overthink it with him like they kind of did earlier in his career, but I mean, he's awesome, man. He gets an $84 million contract extension, and every time I revisit the Patriots for this deep dive series, I get more and more excited at year by Christian Barmore. I was really encouraged by the fact that they went ahead and just paid him, because it's been a little bit of a rocky start for him. I don't want to say a rocky start, but there's just been some weirdness in terms of playing time, and his production has kind of fluctuated at times. He had a stretch in the first half of the year where he got really quiet, and then really came on in the second half of the year. But for them to just kind of have the confidence to be like, nope, you're the guy, you're our alpha, you're our 1, Judon's our 2, and then everybody else is complimentary off of that, I think it just makes a ton of sense. I think he's more than capable of playing up to that contract. I think his run defense has taken steps up year by year as well, which is really encouraging, and that might have been, the last thing they wanted to see to really commit to him and, kind of make him that alpha for that room, I suppose. Like, I don't want to oversell Christian Barmore, but I'm worried about underselling him as well. it's just kind of like a what's not to like about Christian Barmore type of deal. Like, he's got great power, he's got finesse as a rusher, and again, the run defense has really improved. He's always been able to shed blocks, but I think he's gotten much better with his gap discipline, keeping his eyes in the backfield. I wouldn't stop short of saying this guy can be like a Jeffrey Simmons type of defensive tackle, a guy that maybe hasn't entered that Chris Jones or Dexter Lawrence or, true tier 1, but a guy that's a legit #1 piece for a D line and a, superstar. Like, yeah, I could see it happening this year. He's exciting, man. Just has to continue to prove it and get a little bit more consistency. There's not really and because he's so talented, there's not really a true backup for him as there is for like a Dietrich Wise. He's more of a irreplaceable player. But the last remaining sort of starter on this D-line is Devon Godshaw. More of your, kind of classic nose tackle. He's not the biggest guy, but he does play with incredible discipline. He is the total dirty work player for this D-line. He grades out, honestly, very abysmal per PFF. His run defense grades are typically in the 50s. And it's not even really like I'm trying to dunk on PFF grades. Like, I get it. The Patriots just don't put him in a situation where he can record positively graded plays, which if you're going to get over a 60 run defense grade, you need to get your fair share of wins to complement or at least make up for the amount of losses he's going to have when they do ask him to just face double teams. But the losses he has are... okay, he took up 2 gaps. He gave up a couple yards, but he held his gap and opened up opportunities for Wise to shoot a gap, for Barmore to make a play, for the linebackers to do their thing. He is a necessary evil for that front. There's a reason they've kept him around, and for what they need out of that role, he's essential for this group. Not the most exciting player, but he gets the job done. So there's your starters, man. They've got a really fun, well-crafted group. Everybody's got their role, and I have pretty good expectations for this group. In terms of depth, we already talked about Keon White, but off the edge, you've got O'Shane Ximenez, a little bit of a bigger body there, probably, a true Matthew Judon backup for you. Hasn't really emerged as any sort of consistent player, but is an okay backup as a pickup there. And then William Bradley King hasn't really gotten on the field much as a late-round pick out of Arkansas State. But I do think he'll make the team just because the true edge group is pretty thin there. You got some undrafted rookies that'll be in the mix there that I'm not familiar with. And then the interior D-line depth, Armin Watts, good backup defensive tackle. He's one of those guys that has had a hard time like sticking with any team, but he's a good mercenary defensive tackle, good first step, balanced player. As a first guy off the bench for either Barmore or Godshaw, I think he works. Daniel Ekwale is undersized along with Jeremiah Parms. Those guys are both kind of adequate backups for that sort of, undersized DN spot that they have in this group. Sam Roberts is still a developmental D tackle. Tristan Hill's bounced around. He's kind of a full-size, still developmental tackle. Was, I think, a second-round pick by the Raiders, maybe back for that John Gruden regime, but he hasn't worked out. He's, again, bounced around. So the interior D-line depth and really the edge depth outside of Keon White, it's not great. Granted, you do run one deep with Uche and Jennings. But, yeah, I'm going to continue to believe in this defensive line. I know I hyped them up last year, and maybe I'm not quite on, I think I had them as a top 10 pass rush going into the year last year. With what we saw from Wise and Uche taking a step back, you're a little bit lower on them, but it's still an underrated group, man, and they're going to get after it up front. They know who these guys are, which is really cool. But let's talk about these linebackers. It's a unique room. There's nobody in the league that just carries a bunch of 250 throwback type linebackers on the roster, and because they have a guy like Kyle Duggar and even Jabril Peppers on the back end helping out in coverage with this group, they're able to have these big-bodied dudes. But for the most part, both Bentley and Tavai are pretty close to the same guy. I mean, again, I just can't really emphasize enough, like, how good these guys are between the tackles as middle linebackers. They diagnose the run. Both of them can stack, can shed, consistent tacklers. Tavai was a second-round pick for the Lions. He didn't work out for them, but, that's kind of what we're talking about with Bill Belichick. He finds guys like this that were drafted to run his system for Matt Patricia in Detroit. They couldn't figure it out, but you know who did? Bill Belichick. They bring in Tavai, and he's arguably better than Juwan Bentley. Both these guys are like the same age. I think they're both 28, so, kind of in their prime. But, yeah, I mean, it's fun to see big linebackers that can do what these guys can do. It's one of the better run-defending duos, at least between the tackles. Now, if there's a knock on this duo, you do see when they do face outside zone heavy teams and a team like Miami that has all the speed that they have in that backfield, there is something to be said about, getting sideline to sideline, being able to scrape over the top to get in space and be more space linebackers. They do struggle a little bit more there. So that's why they aren't like superstar run defenders. But for the most part, these guys are absolute studs in run defense. The main difference between these guys is Tavai is a guy that we honestly could have mentioned a little bit with the edge group. They will, in that base 3-3-5 formation, use Tavai. And I think a lot of that was with Judon going down. They needed another guy that could do that because they don't trust Uche to defend the run on early downs. So Tavai can do some of that stuff. I don't know how much they'll do that with a healthy Matt Judon, but it is an option for them. Whereas Bentley is more of the true middle linebacker for them. And because of that, Bentley, I think, is much more experienced in coverage. And while neither of these guys can really move in space or man up tight ends, certainly, Bentley does actually have some pretty good coverage reps where he can kind of navigate to the right space. He's very good at like understanding how defenses are trying to attack him, and he'll get in the way of some passing lanes. But in terms of like ball production and actually disrupting plays, you don't see a ton of it. But there are plays where he's in the right spot and he forces the quarterback to look elsewhere because he, maybe didn't take all the cheese on play action or understood the route combination and did some good stuff in coverage. So he's not a total wash, but there is a reason they use Kyle Duggar in the way that we've broken down in that scheme section. He is a huge helper in terms of coverage. This would be more of a C- linebacker coverage group, if not for the added benefit of the fact that he played 65% of his snaps down towards the line of scrimmage, whether that was as a middle linebacker, a weak side linebacker, a true box safety, a slot corner. So he definitely helps the coverage there. I'm not going to act like he's invincible. He did get beat a decent chunk in coverage last year, even when he was playing around the box, covering tight ends and stuff. They love what he does in run defense, and the fact that we grade him out as like a mid-range run defending linebacker when he's in that role speaks volumes to just how good he is. Like, he can actually stack and shed against sometimes linemen. So like, he's a rare run defender for a safety. So, that's obviously a huge reason why they use him down there. But, he's not like prime Cam Chancellor or maybe Derwin James as a linebacker. Like, he will get beat in coverage, but he's still obviously better than either of these two linebackers, or just a lot of linebackers in general are just not very high-end coverage players. Duggar's better in that phase than a lot of those guys, even if you do see him with some losses out there. But love the way they use these guys. They do come in as a top half linebacker room for me, and I think you have to really have an understanding of how these guys are used, how good they are with their rotations, how well they shelter these guys' weaknesses to really grasp the fact that these guys do make a really big impact on this defense, especially with the run defense. This was the third-ranked run defense in DVOA last year. Bentley and Tavai were a substantial part of that. And then I love the Taki signing because it's literally just so reminiscent of Jelani Tavai coming over. It's like, why not? You kind of know what he is and how he can be used. Probably not going to play a ton here, but again, why not? Raekwon McMillan, another thumper, a little more speed, but has had a hard time staying healthy. I think if he could stay healthy, you could maybe do with him with what they did with Mac Wilson, which was occasionally they wanted a little bit more of a true third down linebacker that they don't have here with Bentley and Tavai. You could probably do that stuff with McMillan if you wanted to, but they don't really need to. Then, a couple young guys still in development. Joe Giles-Harris, Christian Ellis. Fun room. Let's talk about the secondary next. And honestly, the optimism just continues for this roster. The cornerback room makes total sense to me. I think it's a really good room that could end the year as a great room. And I'm not going to stop short of selling this as a potential top 5 cornerback trio in the league. It's just a matter of volume and sample size and the fact that we don't give any individual players like too much benefit of the doubt in this series. And Christian Gonzalez, love the player, love the upside. I think he can be a true number 1 in this league and could be a number 1 this year, like a Pro Bowl caliber corner based on the 4 games he played last year and how good of a prospect he was. But he's played 4 games, right? So I can't rank him too high, but he's like as straightforward as it gets, man. Like, the sky's the limit for this dude. He's got rare traits in terms of the size, the length, the agile, the agility, with his foot speed and his change of direction. He's a smart player. He's a physical player. There's just so much to like for him, and it's not a coincidence that he was such a stud when he started the year. If he was able to stay healthy and not miss the last 13 weeks of the season, he might have been a defensive player of the year this year. He really might have been. And then, Jonathan Jones is super solid. He's not getting any younger. He's like 31, but he had incredible speed coming out. He's played slot. He's played outside. He's a great run defender as well. His tape was really good last year, despite the fact that the pass rush took a dip, that he had to, really be a number 1 corner. And, I continue to be impressed by Jonathan Jones. I think he still has some juice in the tank. Long term, it would be beneficial to get some more youth in this cornerback room. They didn't really do that in the draft unless Marcellus Style is a hit. But for now, I think he's very good. I don't expect regression from him this year. And then Marcus Jones, I was singing his praises in last year's deep dive, and he goes down, I think, week 2. But he is one of my favorite high upside, exciting young slot corners in the league. I think I had the take with him coming out that if he was in, I don't remember what the corner was, like maybe Sauce Gardner or Derek Stingley. I think that was his class. I was like, if he's in Derek Stingley's body, this is a rookie all-pro corner. And honestly, when he's played, he's been really good. He's even played some outside corner. He had a game against Devontae Adams. That would have been 2 years ago, where he was like running stride for stride and like kind of shutting down Devontae Adams. Like, he's got rare athletic ability. In fact, they will put him in on offense at times, and they had to. I don't think they'll do that as much now that they have more depth there. But he's a great return man as well. But that's the type of athlete he is. Just the overall short area quickness, but long speed too. He's got, I think 4.3-ish speed. So incredible athlete, natural football player, but great technique, high zone IQ type of dude. He's had to learn the position the right way because he's so small. He's like 5'8", 5'9". But he played a lot of outside corner in college. So he learned a lot of that kind of quarters, top-down, zone stuff. He's impressed, again, in his man-to-man stuff. So I really think Marcus Jones can be the best slot corner in the NFL. I think his upside is of that. It's just a matter of him staying healthy and proving that. So you pair that with Christian Gonzalez, who I think has like Jair Alexander type of upside. Jonathan Jones, who's a very good, he's a serviceable number 1 corner right now. on the low end of number one corners, but he's very good. I mean, this really could be one of the best corner rooms in the league. And now the depth, I can't say it sucks because Shaun Wade and Alex Austin, a pair of day 3 picks in recent draft classes that were not picked by the Patriots. Shaun Wade by the Ravens and Alex Austin by the Bills. The Patriots kind of plucked those guys. They ended up having to play when Gonzalez and Jones went down, and they were okay. They looked like adequate backups in the league. Both had their losses. Both have very limited physical tools. I don't expect them to ever be starters. Like what happened last year, they stepped in and were okay. They were able to survive with those guys and still be a top 10 defense. But it's, just reduces your margin for error with guys like that. Then you do have basically, I would just lump Dial, Bolden, and Wilson into the athletic project bucket. Marco Wilson's been in the league for a few years, whereas Dial and Bolden, Bolden was drafted last year, Dial drafted this year, but Wilson was like 20 when he got drafted. So, those guys will compete on special teams, hopefully take to good coaching, and in a dream scenario, you can hit on one of those guys. Jonathan Jones was an undrafted free agent who made it. So I'm not going to say it's impossible for this Patriots team. All those guys have traits. But there's certainly nobody waiting in the wings for this cornerback room that you're like, oh, I can't wait till he comes in, or I can't wait till he overtakes Jonathan Jones. That might be a next year draft priority. But then the safety room is really freaking good. I mentioned it, but Duggar unfortunately did have a step down in coverage. It's not really for any one thing other than he just was getting beat a little bit more than we had hoped to see. Whether it was one play he's not anticipating a route, or one play is just a little bit too tight in the hips because he is so big, or just they move him all over the field and they ask a lot of him. There's a lot of coverage responsibilities for him to know, and sometimes he's just not always in the right place. So he's good in a lot of different varieties, but he's been a little bit of a streaky coverage player as of late. So I can't say he's a stud coverage player as a safety. I think that kind of sort of blue chip impact is more as a linebacker in terms of coverage, but he does play 1 out of 3 snaps as a safety here, and he's a good coverage player and an elite run defender relative to safeties in the NFL. Whereas, honestly, and I think Patriots fans will agree with this, I actually think Jabril Peppers is a better true safety for this team, and that's exactly why he is more often than not the free safety for them. He's got better speed, he's got better anticipation, he's got better ball skills, but overall, he's been so fun with this Patriots team. He was kind of an afterthought when he was picked up. He was safety 3 next to Duggar and Adrian Phillips. Over time, he earned a role in 2022. And then 2023, he took that number 2 safety spot from Adrian Phillips. And honestly, there was questions coming into the year of like, who's going to be the free safety for this team with Devin McCourty retiring? And a lot of times it was Jalen Mills, but as the year went on, they got more and more comfortable with that being Jabril Peppers, and there's really no reason he can't be a free safety. He's a remarkable athlete. He flirted around with playing running back at Michigan. He's got the range and can absolutely be a true free safety for this team. But that's not all he does. They will rotate him up and down. And he's got the size to come down in the box and play some linebacker. And some of the hits he laid on opponents this year were insane. I mean, he had a hit on Devontae Adams that popped the ball off. It gets intercepted. It's become kind of a signature for him. Is like he's one of the harder hitting downhill safeties. He was a first-round pick by the Browns that's been on kind of a slow but steady incline since he came into the league. And I think he's reached his prime, man, and he's on one of the more budget-friendly contracts that any kind of star defensive back is on in the league. He's a total underrated monster for this defense. I love Jabril Peppers. So I have no reservations about kind of ranking him higher as a safety than I would on Kyle Duggar. Now, he doesn't quite have the linebacker skills that Duggar has, but not too far behind there either. Now, behind those two guys, they are going to be, I think, counting on Marte Mapu to take a leap up, and I'm curious, I think he's kind of in the same spot Peppers was 2 years ago, where they have these other two safeties, but there's room for that third dime linebacker that they will bring in certain packages. There's room for him to come in and get 400 snaps or so on the season and mostly play strong safety, dime linebacker. Because there's going to be plays where they want Duggar and Peppers both as true deep safeties, and then there's a role for Mapu to come in and be that dime linebacker. But there's other times, too, where they want Duggar down in the box, and they actually last year did give Mapu some snaps as a deep safety. We weren't entirely sure where he was going to plug in when they drafted him, because they kind of listed him as a linebacker, and I think he even put on some weight. But I think at this point it's pretty clear with Peppers being more of that single high free safety when, they kind of had to figure this all out after McCourty retired. But yeah, I think they've kind of got this figured out where Peppers is the primary free safety, and then Mapu is not going to be a linebacker in this system. He's going to be a dime linebacker, a box safety type. And I love him in that role, but it's not guaranteed that that's how they use him. A little bit of wait and see there, but that's more of like what I'm expecting, and I think what a lot of Patriots fans are expecting. But yeah, he was a mid-round draft pick, a fun player. Played at was it Sacramento State, I think. Balled out at that level of competition, but definitely played that sort of bandit, kind of slot corner, kind of Kyle Hamilton role, honestly, in that defense. So a lot of potential, perfect fit in this defense. I think the arrow's pointing up on him. He's just very unproven at this point. And then behind him, it's not great depth. Jalen Hawkins has gotten some starts in this league for the Falcons, went to the Chargers, kind of burned out there. He's fine enough depth. And then Josh Bledsoe, more of a special teamer for them. He hasn't really gotten on the field since they spent a late day 3 pick on him a couple years ago. Brennan Schooler made the team last year, I think, as a special teamer. And then I'm not familiar with Del Pettis. So the safety depth is certainly not great. Really, the defensive back depth in general is not great. You got to keep these guys healthy, but they're a B- coverage grade for me, which is anywhere from 11th in the league to 18th. So they're already kind of pushing top 10, but there is no doubt this could be a top 5 secondary in the league this year. You want to talk about upside for this defense? It's just, Gonzalez, Jones, go prove it. And then maybe Mapu can even be an interesting impact as well. So I love this group. They got to stay healthy. The depth's not great. But that's not even mentioning, they're as good as anybody in terms of run support. I mentioned they were 3rd in defensive run defense DVOA last year. What these guys can bring to the table coming downfield is impressive, man. There's just not really any safety duos in the league for the most part, really, that can bring the run support that Duggar and Peppers can, and it could be even better with Mapu this year, getting more playing time. So it's an exciting defense, man. I don't want to overhype them because this is our 31st team and they have obvious offensive questions, but man, if a couple of the things with this defense, if Uche can get back to 2022 and let's say Gonzalez and Marcus Jones are the guys I think they can be, and the drop off in defensive coaching isn't too severe, this could be a game-wrecking top 5 defense. I mean, they were top 10 last year with a lot of things that went wrong. If things start to go right for them, another way you can support Drake May is make it so he has to score 20 points a game. So I think this is ranking them pretty close to their floor at 12th overall in terms of defense. That's how these rankings work, is most of these are ranking these teams at their floor. And I'm excited to see this group, man. I think that has come through in this video. They're a unique group with a bunch of fun players, and I love how they deploy these guys. So, yeah, that's the defensive summary. Let's get through the rest of this thing. We've got the special teams analysis, our new formula here. So they don't bode well for special teams. Now they do have some changes. They got a new kicker. Maybe getting Marcus Jones back to do some kick returning stuff for them could help. And, they changed special teams coordinators. So there's plenty of reason to believe this can improve. But just for how we're doing this, where it's heavily weighted over the last year and then 2 years in the case of the kickers, they don't grade out well in special teams, man. They don't. They really struggled in that department last year. But they're hoping that the changes they made can kind of have them sneak back towards being more of an average special teams that doesn't basically, cost them close to games like it did last year. The young punter is okay. Bryce Behringer, he was a rookie last year. He was all right. But yeah, there's your recap on the Patriots as we take a look at the team splits. Exciting defense, and then offense. It's much more about like find answers to some questions and hopefully be very patient with Drake May. And if you don't get the answers to those questions, like City So at right guard or the playmakers or the play calling, and things don't look good, don't rush them out there, man. You got time here. As good as I think this defense is, I just don't think this team's going to be really in the mix for high-level competition this season. But let's recap the strengths and weaknesses before we take a look at the schedule. For me, the strengths, like the true strengths for this team, all come on the defense. It's the continuity, the depth, or at least not so much the depth. They don't have like great depth, but they've got width, right? Like they have a variety of different starters and versatility. And they were great last year, right? So like there is a lot to like about this defense. Whereas again, we're getting kind of redundant at this point, but can the coaching be as great as it's been with losing Bill Belichick? And then basically every spot on the offense is either a weakness or a question mark. And then even the special teams have got to improve from what they were last year. So a long way to go in a lot of departments for this team. But with that said, let's look at their schedule now that the schedule has been released. And it's a gauntlet, man. I thought their schedule would be a little bit easier. It's certainly not. I mean, even just the first, 8 games. Is this team going to start 0-8? I mean, I like their defense, but they got to play some powerhouse offenses. I hate that they have to play the Jets 2 times in the first 8 weeks because they're a team that, as the season goes on, they're an injury-prone team that might be getting beat up, but that sucks that you got to play the Jets early, week 3. So, that first 8 games is tough, and that's why it's like, man, do we even see Drake May this year? If this is an 0-8 football team, are they rushing to get him out there? It does lighten up for the second half, much more winnable games against Tennessee, Chicago, like Indy at home. But even then, it's like, gosh, other than Tennessee, these are all potential playoff teams. Then you finish up with Buffalo twice and the Chargers at home, week 17, maybe being their most winnable game on the schedule. It's tough, man. For fourth place schedule, not a good draw for the Patriots. Their over-under is 5.5 wins, and now that I see the start to their season, I don't think they get over that. I think 5 wins at the end of the day, it feels pretty good because there are going to be games that this team is able to win 17-16, 20-17, 16-10, like low-scoring games when this defense really comes together. But I just don't have the confidence in this offense with this schedule to really hang. But it's not really about the over-under, the wins for the Patriots this year. In fact, if they're picking high next year and that means they get a great offensive playmaker or a franchise left tackle, that's probably the best case scenario long term, is that the defense does their thing. You're losing competitive football games, and you're patient with Drake May. That is the priority for this team, and feel good about Mayo running this defense, and certainly want to feel that he's only building this defense beyond how we feel about it now. So it's not all bad for the Patriots. It really isn't, but it's an offensive league, and you're the dead last ranked offense in the league right now. So that's not a huge surprise they're going to come down this low. And with that, we are going to turn it over to our conversation with Andre Weingarten, who spent 3 years doing the ratings for EA Sports Madden, has since spent some time inside the league, and is just in general a very good friend of mine. A conversation you're not going to want to miss, some good back and forth, debating how the Patriots are going to be this year. So let's welcome in Andre Weingarten. Andre, my friend, how's it going? So good to see you. You know, I feel like we're always exchanging texts and DMs, trash talking our football teams, but it's been a couple years since we've been able to connect and have you on the channel. We had you for a couple years ago, the Patriots deep dive, but it is so good to have you back to represent your Patriots. How you doing, buddy?
I appreciate it. Doing great. And we spend a lot of time gushing over Jordan Love together. It's not all trash talk and banter, Sometimes we just need the twin connection to just be like, Jordan Love, yeah, no, he's fantastic. We've known all along. We're good.
Yes. You and I were definitely huge J-Lo guys. You love to see it.
Yep.
So you guys have another franchise quarterback, it would seem. It took you about 3 years of having to watch Mac Jones, and that's the hope, right? So what was your reaction when you end up getting Drake May at 3? Did you kind of think that was possible, and were you super stoked about it? What did you think about Drake May coming out?
So, yeah, I mean, I thought it was possible. I wasn't certain that it was going to happen. Um, so one of the important pieces of information is that Kraft has been known to dabble a little bit. He wanted Mac Jones. Belichick didn't. He didn't want Baker Mayfield. He wanted to keep Mac Jones. He didn't want Will Levis. All guys that front office in general were high on, and they had to kind of pivot around. So I was worried that he would want somebody else. And
Sure.
it seems that he let them kind of lead forward with that. Once Kingsbury was in Washington, I thought there was a legitimate possibility that May was going to fall. Just knowing what Cliff Kingsbury likes, how he's recruited his entire time, his system, his air raid spread, all that stuff, the mobile quarterback aspect.
Yeah.
And not just mobile, but like super athletic. So I was like, oh, wow, there's actually a shot that they could get a really good quarterback here. And then as I started doing the research, I'm like, the one who I want, obviously Caleb Williams would have been fantastic if he had fallen. There was no chance that was happening. I'm like, Drake May's the guy I want. I could live with Jaden Daniels. I would not be thrilled if it was McCarthy or one of the other guys, or if they moved down, which no GM has ever survived doing when they need a quarterback, mind you. Sashi Brown was the last one to do it, and that did not last much
That
longer.
didn't go so well for Cleveland, right?
No. Well,
yeah.
It did for a little bit with getting Baker the next year, but they moved down twice. They passed up on a few different guys in the 2017 draft. But May was a fun quarterback for me. The person who I compared him to throughout the process he reminded me a lot of Justin Herbert.
Yeah.
From a build, from a overall skill set. And people forget that Herbert really was not a very refined quarterback at Oregon. He has transformed that, but he was a lot more passive and then panicky in his decision making. May is a lot more poised and then a little too aggressive. I don't think he has the same physical tools. I don't think his arm is as juiced up as Herbert, who you could argue is 1B in the league to Josh Allen, right in that tier with Mahomes as well. He's not as fast as Herbert, but he's twitchier. So, if you say he's 95% of the athlete that Herbert is, with a more aggressive gene to him, that's what I saw in Drake May throughout the process. I'm like, if you miss with him, on him, right? You take him and it doesn't work, we're good. You swung for the fences and it's whatever. If you took someone else, you popped out on a bunt. Right? Like that's what Mac Jones was, right?
Yeah.
You're starting with your ceiling in your floor. In a
Mhm.
division, in a conference that is loaded with quarterback talent, you need a difference maker. He is, in terms of arm talent, in terms of poise, it seems in terms of personality, he's young, right? Was he the youngest quarterback in the group?
It's probably either him or
McCarthy,
McCarthy.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. I
So I
guess that
mean,
and Caleb too, but yeah, no, he's definitely young, and he's young in terms of, like, he wasn't one of these quarterbacks that was doing, Elite 11 quarterback drills going back to when he was 9 years old. So, like, his footwork is a little wonky. He was a baseball
yeah,
player. So, like, in terms of the amount of years he's played quarterback, he's probably the youngest.
yeah, he's about 7 months younger or older than McCarthy, but he's about like a year younger than Caleb, 12,
Mhm.
10 months younger than Caleb. So, and then Daniels and Penix and Nix, they're way
Oh,
older.
yeah.
Um, so it's like, you have a ball of clay who has shown some really big things, some creativity as a passer and all that stuff. So I'm like, I'm in. I am in. And then when they took him, it was just a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
I, you know, I was on record as wanting Lamar Jackson in 2018 to be behind Brady for a year or two.
Mhm.
And they took Isaiah Wynn and Sony Michelle. And then they took Mac Jones. I wanted to take a shot on Fields. If he
Yeah.
was going to be there, I wanted to see what they could do with that caliber of athlete. And they didn't get him. They traded up and they settled for Mac Jones. And it's like, I guess.
Yeah. It is funny how pretty much everybody, it seems, arrives at either Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, or I actually arrived at kind of what Trevor Lawrence has shown to be in the NFL, because I think he's
Interesting.
a little more
Yeah.
twitchy than a Herbert. I think the arm talent's a little bit closer there.
Mhm.
And Lawrence actually has some accuracy stuff where, kind of like Mays, sometimes he's just like a little bit off, and it's like, why are you off? Like, you shouldn't
Yeah.
be.
It
Yeah. Where,
for me, I think it's Lawrence's stride length. He's a bigger dude.
mhm.
May is 6'4", right?
Yeah.
Herbert and Lawrence, they're 6'5", 6'6". So they have those longer strides, those longer gaits. So yeah, also Lawrence has a little bit of a longer lever as well, which can kind of get
Yeah.
into some issues. So it's like, for me, I think May's footwork is really, really fixable. Like
Yep.
I'm not worried about that. If you throw him into the fire too soon, you don't give him a chance to rework it. And just looking at clips throughout, now that they're out there, you can see how deliberate he is in his footwork. He's not even deliberate with his arm right now. Like, it's not even a factor. It's just, okay, the rep's over, throw the ball. And he's,
Yeah.
lax and he's good, but it's so deliberate on the footwork because that's the thing that's going to get him on the field immediately. As soon as
Mhm.
that is in a spot that you can reliably hit your landmarks and your throws, he'll be out there.
Yeah. So where are you at in terms of, kind of when do you think we see them, and when should we see them? Because I'm more like, the footwork stuff is the footwork stuff. I think they should and will work on that whether he's starting or not. I don't think it's so bad that it's going to, like, compromise his game on the field.
Right.
Certainly, some of the timing stuff will be off and all that. But for me, it's more of like, you've got new offensive coordinator coming in. You've got shaky offensive line. It's not the worst offensive line, but there's a couple areas of questions. And then the wide receiver situation I ranked as the worst in the league. So it's like, we've seen so many quarterbacks come in and, stop trusting the timing of the offense because the wide receivers aren't in the right place. They're
Yep.
dropping balls. They can start to look at the rush and lose any semblance of pocket presence they've had. You lose that overriding confidence that you had as a successful young quarterback. For me, it's like, yeah, the footwork stuff is the footwork stuff. They'll work on it. But for me, it's like, when do you play Drake May? Is that something you're worried about? Or is it as simple as the footwork for you?
I think the day that he is better than Jacoby Brissett in terms of being a processor, mechanically, all that stuff, that's the day the clock starts for, okay, when are we going to put him in? And I don't think that is a guarantee that's going to happen this year. I don't think
Mhm.
it needs to. Uh, Brissett is a pro's pro. He can win games in the NFL. He can stay on time. He can do that sort of thing. I think if he is going to be out there this year, the window is week number 9. So
Mhm.
They'll have the London game against Jacksonville. They'll have a game hosting the Jets, and then they're on the road at Tennessee. I think
Yeah.
that Tennessee game is probably the one. You don't want to start him in Chicago. Just Soldier Field's a tough place to play. It's either that or at home against the Rams week 11. I think those are the two sweet spots.
Mhm.
I don't think you're going to wait until after the bye because it's a late bye, and they chose that. Remember, right? They could have had the bye after the London game,
Mm.
and they chose not to. So they got a little bit of a mini bye because of some of their scheduling things. Um, right, they had the quick turnaround um, week 3. So they get that mini bye week 4 before they go to face the 49ers. So
Okay.
they chose to have one later in the year. So they kind of get a couple of them in there.
Yeah.
Um, I just don't think it's necessary to get him out there. Now, if they make a trade for a premier wide receiver because they have all this, they're swimming in cap space, it's likely not going to cost a first round pick to do it for one of these guys. If they do that, you might say, oh, we could actually win some more games here.
Mhm.
You know, if they're losing by 3 points consistently and they're approaching 500, 3-5, 4-4, somewhere in there after those first 8 weeks,
With a
I
brutal schedule, by the way.
with a brutal schedule, if they
Yeah.
manage that, he's going to be out there. If they're
Yeah.
2-6, do you need to? It just depends on whether they want him getting live reps. If they feel that he's
Yeah.
good enough that he can do it and it's not going to hinder him, there's no problem.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that look at the schedule there. I think that makes a ton of sense. Second half, just in terms of getting the team ready, getting his
Yep.
footwork ready as well. But yeah, in terms of who you're playing, that matters too. You want him to get a friendly introduction. So I'm kind of on the same page with you. It's not that he has to sit all year. If you end up going that route, great. I think we're both in agreement. Don't put him out there week 1. That'd be a big mistake. This team just has too much to figure out. But
Unless he is a absolute world beater, right?
yeah,
If he's CJ Stroud day one, just put him out there. Like we didn't expect Tank Dell or those guys to be the
yeah. But
guys
how do
they
you know
were.
that if he's not playing in a real game?
Well, if he's playing in preseason, if he's doing things in practice that you haven't seen that are rare, right?
Yeah,
You can see if he's handling the protections, if he's running that quarterback room despite Jacoby Brissett being there in a way that everyone's rallying around him.
yeah,
You know, like there are signs because I don't think Stroud was supposed to be the day one starter necessarily. Um, it just kind of worked out that way, and because he
sure,
earned it. So
yeah.
if May can do that, if he can overcome the veteran before the start of the season, maybe they'll say yes because the defense
Mhm.
is so good and so talented that anything beyond being the worst in the league could win you games on from
Yeah.
the offensive side.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. So that's a good transition to I want to talk a little bit about this defense. So I kind of broke it down already in this video about, it's kind of a 3-3-5 hybrid type of front. I'm just curious kind of like how you would describe their defense from your perspective. And what are some of the sort of unique strengths and weaknesses about this defense? Because it is, and maybe you disagree with this, but I think it's really kind of a standalone sort of scheme in the league
Yeah,
right now. Like I think the Raiders do some of this stuff, but it's not the full commitment to this system that the Patriots do.
yeah.
So yeah, take it away.
I think you've seen influences it in some places, like you see a little bit in Minnesota without the consistent corner play,
Hmm.
or even really the roster strength on the defensive side. Right, they're going through that rebuild. You saw a little bit of it in Tennessee with Vrabel at times, but the one word I would use to describe this defense is flexible.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know if the corner personnel is sensational, right? I think Jonathan Jones has consistently been a fine player who's losing a step as he has aged. There's a huge question mark in the nickel, and obviously Christian Gonzalez, how he's going to rebound after injury. He looked fantastic when he played
Hmm.
against some really high level competition. That's very exciting going into what is age 22 season.
Yeah.
um, but you have so many different players that can do so many different things, whether it be like we were talking before we went live about Jelani Tavai and how he spent about half of his time as an edge setter. This is a guy who's been a traditional off ball linebacker in the NFL. And I mean, he played in some of these systems, right? He played with Matt Patricia in Detroit, and he was, used in a role that you would expect maybe he would pull some things that Belichick did. And it's like, no, we're going to try him on the edge. We'll play him off ball. You have Duggar and Mapu and Peppers. Peppers played almost an even distribution of in the box, overhang, and deep for them last year. And then you have, all the different edge guys who you can put them over the A gap in some of those blitz situations. You can trust a Judon or an Uche to get depth in their drops if they need to. You can trust a now Taki or a Tavai to rush in a pinch if you need to as part of a blitz package. So you have so many different moving parts that it's almost like the way that the 49ers deploy their offensive personnel, right? When you see that personnel, it's not 11, it's not 12, it's, oh God, who is lining up where? And that's what the Patriots are able to do. They're able to dictate things defensively based on who they're facing and what their objectives are on a specific play. You want all three of your safeties on the field at the same time, which they did pretty much, I think, as much as anybody in the league. Like that.
Yeah, I think Minnesota probably would be the one team that did 3 safety more than New England.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, you want to do that? Fantastic. You want to do all the sim pressures, all the creeper stuff with against the condensed formations that Mike McDaniels and those guys like to do. They can do it from all sorts of personnel. They run man, they run zone, they run combo coverages where they'll pass off crossers in man coverage. They've been doing that for years. It's what they did to slow down Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. It's what they've done to slow down the speed demons in in Miami now. So they can do so many different things that it's almost like they take control of the game from the offense. It's not like they're playing on their heels and reacting. They're almost dictating.
Yeah. Well, and that was kind of the second part of my question is like, it's so multiple, it's so versatile. I think a lot of what they do is very scheme oriented. Like, isn't there a part of you that's like, okay, but Bill's not here. Bill is a living encyclopedia of knowing tendencies and formations and what's coming and how to utilize this defense. I think that's a big reason why you're not seeing this defense around the league by a lot of people. Now, obviously, Mayo's been there, but are there aspects of this scheme, do you think, that like are maybe harder for a defensive coordinator to kind of utilize as opposed to just, the 30 other teams in the league that are just coming out in base 4-2 all the time? And is that something that could lead to a drop off in what was a top 10 defense last year, despite all the injuries?
Yeah, I think it's a totally valid concern. They don't use a lot of labels in New England in terms of their coaching staff. So like Brian was or Steve or whoever they've rotated who was the defensive coordinator. Mayo was heavily involved with this to the point that they knew that they couldn't let him get away. Like he was that important to the team. Now, are you going to get the psychic anticipation stuff that Belichick did? Probably not. But are you going to get one of the highest processing linebackers of his era to be able to deploy the system that, from both the player and coach perspective, that he has experienced for the past 16 years of his life? Yeah, I think there's some of it. He seems like he is that type of guy. He's in the same way that I think there's going to be some drop off in the prediction and some of the prep. We'll see how he is in terms of game flow. We don't know how much Belichick overwrote his coaches in certain situations and what that entails. And we have no idea what Mayo's going to be in terms of clock management on the defensive side or in general. Like there's a lot of unknowns there. But from a buy-in perspective, I think that is as high as it has ever been. Because if you look at all the guys who re-signed, especially on the defensive side, they all re-signed at below market value.
Yeah.
They want
Boucher could have had
there.
so much more.
Right. They want to be there more than anything because they know what the culture that Gerard Mayo brings to that defense, to that room. So I think they're going to play in the same way that you see a Robert Saleh or you see some of those guys that, or a
Mm.
Pete Carroll, where it's like, wow, you see those guys want to play for him. Mike Tomlin, same thing, right? They want to be out there for that coach to
Yeah.
succeed, to make that coach happy, and to do everything that they're doing together. I think that's going to be there,
Hmm.
and I think that's been missing the past couple of years. I
Yeah, I
think they've been
love
a
that.
little robotic, but I think that's an element that could. I don't think it's going to offset it entirely. Do not
Right.
get me wrong there, but I think that it could help offset some of the drop off that we would
Hmm.
anticipate, and maybe the injuries, having those guys back, will do
Right.
the rest.
That's what I was gonna say is I love that point. You get a little more rah-rah out there and then get a couple guys back injured, get some development. Yeah, I mean, you just gotta bridge that gap a little bit at least, and then you just also need to not be the worst offense in the league. That might help too.
Yeah, or
So
31st, because there was one other worse offense in that division.
oh, that's true. That is true.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. All right. Cool. So let's wrap this up with a
Yep.
superlatives challenge here.
Okay.
Um, and I'm gonna let you. I do want to give my guy, like the
Okay.
guy I'm picking as well, but I'm gonna let you go first on these. So
Uh, you
I
can
have.
go first if you want. I don't mind. I have mine written down. I'm not changing my answer based on what you give.
No, I'll make it easy on you.
Okay. Okay.
If you take my guy, I'll either just pass or come up with another name.
Okay.
But we got 5 superlatives here. Who is, Andre, your team MVP, the guy that is going to help the Patriots the most in winning maybe 4 games this year?
Wow, he's gonna have a 4 wins above replacement. He really must be the team
Oh,
MVP. Uh, I'll go Judon. I think having him back
mm,
on that team, a consistent pass rusher where you can trust him to beat a tackle one on one, is a huge thing. That while they had some guys who could do it on the interior, right? They had Barmore who could do it. Wise was, decent at times. Uche was and has been a guy who can win in those clear pass rush situations. I think Judon brings just a relentless presence to that team and to that defense. He is a leader. He is the leader that Hightower and Mayo were in the middle, and he does it up from the edge, right? I don't think Bentley is the vocal guy that you have from that rah rah perspective, but I think having someone that can be a game changer if he comes back healthy, which
yeah,
I think
he has a
even if
bicep.
he yeah, like even if he's
So
not perfect, I think he still brings that energy and that fight. And you see him on social media, he's the vocal guy trying to recruit everybody. He's
sure,
fun. He's someone that
yeah.
they clearly missed.
So maybe he can bring some of that boost of rah rah as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy that he can actually play all 3 downs for them on the
Yes.
edge. Everyone else is kind of you've got to kind of pick your poison. But yeah, he's the
And,
guy
and you
that
and you
can.
throw him in the A gap if you need to.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I did have written down on that D line someone that the last 2 years as I've been getting ready for this series where I do 3 games of all 22 for all the teams before I
Mhm.
get in. Every time Christian Barmore is like just pops off the screen. And I
Yep.
I don't know if I'm just picking the right games or what, but like I
It's hard to
see
pick the wrong ones with him.
yeah, and the growth trajectory's been phenomenal. Just got the big payday. He got
Yep.
84 million, 4 years. And I think he played up to it last year. I think you finally saw the run defense side of things start to
Yep.
come together a little bit more. He's always flashed in run defense, but
Mhm.
was much more disciplined and consistent in that phase. And I think it showed. And I think that was probably why they were finally, well, not finally, he was on his rookie deal, obviously, but that was kind of what set it over. Like, we can trust this guy because the growth's been there in every phase. But yeah, I think he could take one more leap to be a sort of Jeffrey Simmons type
Mhm.
of level player. Um, Maybe not a Chris Jones or, that
Yeah.
true tier one, but that next group down. I think
Uh,
he could be that type of guy and really emerge as the best player on this football team this year.
yeah, I think he
Um,
could. The one thing I'll say is that when you play in that Patriot system in that 3-3-5, you're playing at times gap and a half. You're doing a lot more
mhm.
processing than penetrating. He can do both. If Chris Jones is a penetrator, that's the difference between the roles that are asked of him.
Mhm.
If you want to put him in a 5 tech role, in a sub situation, or you want to put him in 3 tech and just let him go, he'll kill you, right? He
Yeah.
will kill them. But I think the run defense took a while because it's a lot more read, react, stuff like
Hmm.
that. And it's not easy. It's why a lot of teams don't do well with it. So,
Yeah.
I think it's a fair point that the run defense took a while. Year 3 in the system, it started clicking.
Yeah. All right. My next superlative is the breakout offensive player. I'm going to let you go first. This is a gift to let you go first, because getting a breakout player on the offense on this team is not easy, especially when no rookies are allowed.
I am going with, I don't think you're going to guess it. City So.
Yeah, I probably could have guessed that.
Darn it.
Yeah.
New offensive line coach, a really, really good, respected one in Scott Peters. New system, everything that they're doing there. He played 772 snaps as a 4th-round rookie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was not supposed to start. That was not what was planned coming into the year. The hope was that you would have Strange and Onwenu at guard, and that the tackles and Trent Brown and Riley Reef would hold up, and it fell apart immediately. And he got thrust into the action. He played week 1. It was a mess. He ended up coming back week 6. He came back week 6 and went through.
Of Jalen Carter's pressures came against City So last season.
Yeah, it's also 90% of his PFF grade.
Yeah.
Jalen Carter's, not City So. Yeah. So,
well, not to talk about the Eagles, but the rest of the league saw that and they're like, well, you're getting double teamed now.
Yeah, well, it's not like they needed to double team the other guys on the interior. It was a little rough there. But anyway, I think year 2, a huge year for an interior guy. I think he's in line to be the starter. It looks like Mafi is backing up Cole Strange on his side. And we don't know if Cole Strange is going to play for anytime soon. He's now month to month, per Gerard Mayo, with an injury that he suffered at the end of the year. So, it's Chucks and Mafi on that side. They really are going to need to rely on City So with Peters and now this more zone-based blocking scheme. I think that fits him, and I think that fits what could benefit them in general. So
reminds me a little bit of Ed Ingram for the Vikings, where year 1 was, run blocking was fine-ish. So was more than fine-ish in run blocking, but he took a big leap in year 1 to year 2, and you're just kind of hoping you can kind of clean up some of the technique. He leans, that's his thing. He's just always like kind of gets over his skis. So just, it's fixable, but it's not easy.
Right. And I think, if you're moving laterally, it helps more, right? Especially with the play action game, which they should probably emphasize more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I'll spend a little bit less time on this because I've already kind of broken these guys down up to this point, but I had Tyquan Thornton.
Ooh.
I know. I get it. He's had drops and it hasn't been great, but I do still see separation on film. And he finally is he has 2 guys now that can actually throw a deep ball. So that's all I'm going to say. I think he's actually got a chance to succeed. When he went to be Mac Jones's deep threat, I was like, well, he's done. Like, that's not going to work. It's just not a fit. All right. Breakout defense. Go for it.
Keon White. Huge fan of Keon White. I think it's a little cheating doing a 2nd-year guy who is kind of developmental and raw, but I think he's a 5-tech. I think they could put him on the edge and let him be an edge setter if they needed to. You can deploy those guys and do a lot of different things. It's just they have a need right now on the interior. Is Lawrence Guy is no longer on the squad, right?
I believe he retired.
Yeah. So there's an opportunity for him to be in that mix. You have Gotcha at the 1, you have Wise and him rotating with Barmore and Aquale. Like, this is his opportunity to step up. He's listed at 285. Could he be 270 and play on the edge? Yeah. Could he be 300 and play on the interior? Yes. Like, he is right in that mix. And even at 285 and a 335, you can live with that if he's playing 5-tech because he showed enough burst and explosiveness to do some good things. It was always going to be a developmental year, but I'm really excited for the strength and athleticism that he possesses.
Yeah, I think it's a good pick. I'm gonna double down on Josh Uche, who I thought, I mean, it's like a second breakout because I felt like he had a breakout
Yeah.
in his third season.
Yep.
And then they didn't pay him. He goes into last year, and he wasn't bad, but certainly didn't live up to what he did the year before. But I think, with the injury to Judon, it may be. I mean, I don't have a great answer for why Uche didn't have a ton of production compared to what he was before. It also felt
His
like
win
they
rate
just
his
weren't
win
using
rate
him
was
as
still pretty
much.
good, right?
It was still very good. His pressure rate,
Yeah.
his win rate were all very good. So he comes back. He was probably the focal point of, you mentioned like the guys want to be here. Like Uche is probably the
Yep.
stamp on that. And yeah, like I think they're gonna kind of recommit to getting him his numbers. And he took a 1-year, $3 million deal to come back. Like
That's
definitely
crazy.
feels like no, he's at least a 8 million, 1 year, 8 million flyer. But
Yeah, if Bryce Huff got that and he hasn't shown that he can play any run defense in the NFL, like,
right.
and he got
Yeah, like
what,
Bryce
16
Huff,
mil,
Uche.
right? He got
Yeah.
16 mil, and he's older. Like,
He got the Trey Hendrickson contract,
yeah,
the first Trey Hendrickson contract. Yeah.
yeah. So it's
But
like,
yeah,
yeah, Uche is not so far removed from that. And if he was playing on that defense in New York, I'm sure he would have put up similar production because his pass rush skill set is fantastic.
absolutely. All right, let's speed round these last two here. Overrated player on the Patriots. I struggled with this one.
I did, and then I didn't. I'll say it based off of the contract. I think it's Mike Onwenu.
Hmm.
I really like him. I think he's a fine tackle and a good guard.
Yeah.
I think he's worth the money at guard. I think he's a stabilizing presence at tackle right now because they need it, but I don't think he's reliable enough in his pass sets to be a guy on an island consistently. I think he's shown that he can at times if he needs to, but he's massive.
Yeah.
He's not a tackle body, and he's not long.
Yeah. I brought this up in the video earlier, but it's going to be really interesting now with Hassan Reddick and Chop Robinson in this division.
Yep.
Those are some matchups where it's like, can he even get to that landmark against those types of dudes?
Yeah, he will. They'll have the tight end aligned to his side. They'll do the play action stuff. He'll be playing on the back end. It'll be like he is a better mover than Orlando Brown, but it'll probably be something a little bit similar. He'll have tells in his pass set when it's a rundown versus a pass down, and you'll let him overcommit because you need him to make sure that guys are fine. And that sometimes you have to do that. And if too many guys are tipping you off and it's a consistent thing, things get a little dicey. But that's one of those situations that you'd rather live with it.
Yeah. Okay. God, I didn't even feel good about this answer for overrated. I'm scared to even bring it up because I don't even really believe he's an overrated player, but it's someone you had him as a team MVP. So it
that's fine.
I think that's kind of what I'm talking about. Generally, when I talk to Patriots fans, they come in. Hang on. But when I talk to Patriots fans like yourself, they just seem to come in a little bit higher on Judon as maybe like he's a 1. I think he's a really good 2. That's kind of where I'm at on him.
Yeah. His pass rush win rate for me has been something that I've studied in the past, and he's in the clear, but it's not by much. Where based on like percentage of his pressures that are unblocked or cleanup, my bar is about 38-40%. If you're above that, it's a red flag. And he's usually at around 36-37%, which is it's still good enough. Like his sacks come through unblocked or cleanup stuff because of scheme, but the pressures are good enough. His run defense good enough. I'm with you though. I love him for reasons other than the one-on-one production.
Yep, exactly. Yep, and that's all I would stop short of saying anything bad about Judon because I love him as a player.
Right.
All right, what about underrated for you?
Okay. Can I give a half joke and then a full?
You can say whatever you want.
Joey Sly.
Oh, stop.
I mean, if he's
just because off of name alone.
No, because Chad Ryland was horrendous last year.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if Joey
Yeah, he was.
Sly is even decent for them, you know,
Hey,
we
that's where, as a Packers fan, if we can go from horrible rookie to Brandon Joseph, it's like, hey, that's a huge upgrade.
right. Like, yeah, I don't care if the dude can't hit PATs if he can hit field goals with
Yeah.
this offense.
Yeah.
But Jabril Peppers is my underrated.
Yeah. That was mine too.
He's someone that I think people have thought about in being that do-it-all player at Michigan to playing 45 yards off the ball in Cleveland to being a fine player in New York, getting injured, and now being the versatile player he was at Michigan.
Yeah, that's so well said. He has been the versatile guy throughout his career, but in individual spots, whereas he
Yeah,
finally went to the spot where it's like, hey, he's versatile. Let's be versatile with him.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's another high energy guy, great athlete, great teammate. Um, just
Has
he can do
game
it.
changing hits.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. And he has said he doesn't understand why he was playing 45 yards off the ball in Cleveland right after that. Like he said that recently. And I totally
Yeah.
get it. But he's also said the experience of playing in that spot has made him a better player because he got to see
Yeah.
everything from the top down for the first time. And now he can do that.
So I do have a quick question.
Yeah.
They had Mills there last year, and their primary single high guys were Peppers and Mills, correct?
Yes. I mean, they did rotate some of the other guys. But yes, those were the main two.
So I don't even need a take here. I'm just curious, like, do you think he's going to be primarily kind of free safety? I mean, they'll still tap into the flexibility, maybe because I
Uh,
think he played like
yeah.
40% of his snaps, maybe 45% around the box last year.
Yeah. Yeah. He
Where do you think that's at this year?
it looked like it was about 400 free, about 280 in the box, about 130 in overhang slot. Um, I would expect him to probably play something similar. I think you're going to see Jalen Hawkins take the
Mm,
Jalen Mills role. It's a guy who has played free, who's played kind of in the box a little bit. I think Mapu could, with an extra year of
yeah.
seasoning, be that guy who could play a little bit because, if you're playing post safety, which I think we've had that discussion that means different things for different people. I'm talking too high safety. If he
Hmm.
can play in that deep half, then you can do rotation up, rotation down. You can have
Right.
someone that's typically doing it. Um, but, you know, as long as there's enough disguise there, it's fine. Uh, you know, and then as the field shrinks, once you start getting into the high red zone, all bets are off of who's lining up where, doing what, because now
Right.
you're not worrying about 30 yards of space, you're worrying about 25, 20, 15. Um, and you can kind of manipulate things in that way. But I would expect still a four safety rotation. Maybe they'll find someone sitting around in
Hmm.
at the at either the trade deadline to
I
add.
feel like an Eddie Jackson or Micah Hyde would be so perfect on this defense.
Hyde's going to stay
Yeah.
in Buffalo or retire, from what he said.
Mm,
Uh, Eddie Jackson would make a lot of sense. I'd love a Justin Simmons. I don't think he's the
yeah.
perfect fit. I think he's more of a Fangio style defense fit. I think the Rams
Right.
are the best suitor considering their history, coaching staff wise, with him.
Hmm.
Position coach, defensive coordinator, all sorts of stuff. But
Yeah.
Eddie Jackson would be a good fit. I think you could definitely find a versatile guy, even a guy who would be like on a practice squad somewhere, final cut down day that they just want to put a claimant on. And I mean, they
Mhm.
have Schooler already, but they love their special teamers, and now they have an extra spot, right? Cody Davis is gone. Matthew Slater,
Mm.
right? Slater retired.
Slater retired. Yep.
Yeah. So you have a couple special teams core spots that could be filled by someone who could do a little bit more than what they did in terms
Yeah.
of overall defense.
Cool. All right. I mean that, and that's how it goes with us. I say speed round, and then I divert you into breaking down special team safeties that are going to be getting 35 snaps to the Patriots this year. I love it. That's a perfect way to end.
Yep.
That was a great conversation as always, Andre. Anything you want to say before we head out?
Now I really appreciate you having me. It's always fun talking football. Patriots or otherwise. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope everyone enjoyed this conversation.
And that is going to do it. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Andre. We're going to have lots of great guests throughout this series. Not for everyone, but certainly for plenty of them. And yeah, that's all we got, man. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't hit that like button yet, please do. If you're not subscribed, again, please do. You're not going to want to miss this series as we go. Let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think of the rankings, the player ratings, you name it? Just drop your feedback down below in general. I appreciate you guys for watching. The passion for this series is off the charts. I'm so thankful to have you guys along for the ride throughout this offseason. I know these videos get long, but hey, that's it ain't called a deep dive for nothing, right? So thank you for watching, and we'll see you for the next one. Peace out.